Tonight, beneath a sky brushed with silver starlight and winds that whisper ancient secrets across endless dunes, we enter a world where shadows ride beside legends, and a single man becomes a symbol carved into the very bones of the desert. A falcon circles above the sands, silent, watchful, guiding us into the hidden struggle that shaped an empire, a struggle carried in the heart of a man named T.E. Lawrence, whose footsteps still echo across the vast Arabian wilderness. Before we begin, a warm welcome to everyone joining us from far and wide, those settling in for a late-night listen in the U.S., early dawn dreamers in Europe, quiet, snowy evenings in Canada, and all of you tuning in from other corners of the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or deep into the peaceful hours of night. If you enjoy these storytelling journeys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us where and when you're watching. Your support helps these stories continue to drift gently into the world like lanterns carried by the breeze. Now, take a slow breath. Get comfortable. Let the day fall away piece by piece. When you're ready, we will step into the desert, where secrets sleep beneath the dunes and destiny waits like a mirage. Dawn had not yet broken, and still the desert stirred as if awakening from 1,000-year slumber. The sands shifted in soft, whispering waves, moving like silk beneath the faintest touch of wind. Over the horizon, the first muted glow of morning crept upward, painting the edges of distant dunes in pale rose and gold, as though the sun hesitated before stepping into such a vast and ancient kingdom. T. Lawrence stood alone beside his camel, boots half buried in cool sand that had not yet felt the scorch of day. The air tasted clean and sharp, cold in that peculiar way only the desert knows, the type of cold that reminded travelers that survival here was never guaranteed. He wrapped his keffiyeh closer around his face, feeling the gentle flutter of the cloth as it caught the wind, and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle into him. It was a silence unlike any he had ever known in the world beyond Arabia, a silence that felt alive, full of memories and waiting stories. The desert didn't simply lie empty, it watched. It listened. It measured every soul who dared cross its expanse. A falcon swooped low overhead, its wings slicing through the morning air with a soft casting a fleeting shadow over his boots before rising again. Lawrence followed its arc with his eyes, sensing something symbolic in the creature's appearance. A messenger, perhaps, or a reminder that he was walking into a world ruled not by maps, but by instinct, loyalty, and the fierce independence of those who called this harsh land home. Behind him, faint silhouettes of Bedouin riders gathered on the ridge. Their camels grumbled softly, shifting their weight, forming dark brushstrokes against the rising light. Fires from the night were dying, releasing thin ribbons of smoke that curled upward and vanished as though swallowed by the morning sky. The day ahead promised hardship, long miles, blowing sand, uncertainty. And yet, beneath all of that, Lawrence felt an odd calm blooming in his chest, a sense that the desert itself was offering him a beginning, a quiet, measured welcome into a story he did not yet understand, but could already feel unfolding like a tapestry woven with gold and dust. He placed a gentle hand on the camel's neck, feeling the warm pulse beneath its skin, and whispered softly, "We start with the dawn." But even as he spoke, he sensed that his journey wasn't starting now. It had started long before, perhaps the moment he first set foot on this land, or perhaps even earlier, when some unspoken thread tied his destiny to the shifting sands. Above him, the falcon circled once more, before drifting toward the horizon, as if urging him to follow. And so he did. The sun climbed slowly, as though reluctant to disturb the desert's fragile calm, and its first rays stretched long and thin across the dunes. The light did not arrive abruptly here. Instead, it unfurled gently, layer by layer, warming the sands from a cool silver blue into tones of amber and honey. Each grain caught the glow like a tiny mirror, scattering brilliance across the vast, rippling landscape. Lawrence mounted his camel as the Bedouin riders approached, their silhouettes sharpening in the strengthening light. They moved with a quiet ease, their robes flowing like extensions of the wind itself. Their faces were mostly hidden beneath folds of cloth, but their eyes, dark, steady, and endlessly deep, held the certainty of those who belonged to this land in a way no outsider ever truly could. The leader, Sheikh Oda Abu Tayi, rode at the front. Even in the soft morning stillness, he radiated a presence impossible to ignore, a living storm wrapped in a warrior's calm. His posture was straight, commanding, as though he were carved from the spine of the desert itself. When he reached Lawrence, he offered a small nod, the single gesture carrying welcome, respect, and expectation all at once. "Are you ready, El Orans?" Auda's voice was a low rumble, its accent carved by sand and fire. Lawrence returned the nod, as ready as the desert will allow. A faint smile touched Auda's lips. Not amusement, but acknowledgment. "Good. We ride with the morning wind. It favors those who rise early." The caravan began its slow, rhythmic advance. Hooves and padded camel feet pressed into the dunes, each step leaving impressions that softened almost instantly, reclaimed by drifting sand. The desert allowed only momentary marks, as though it refused to hold on to anything for too long. The air warmed, carrying with it scents of dust, leather, and the faint sweet traces of dried dates stored in saddlebags. The riders spoke little. Communication here relied more on glances, gestures, and the subtle awareness of one another's presence. Lawrence listened to the desert, the distant creak of camel harnesses, the flutter of kefias brushing against fabric, the soft exhale of sand shifting beneath weight. As the caravan reached a high dune ridge, the entire desert opened before them like an endless sea, frozen in waves. The riders paused, their silhouettes framed against the horizon. Lawrence could feel the immensity of it, its challenges, its mysteries, its silent demand for humility. Auda turned slightly in his saddle. "This is only the beginning," he said, gaze fixed on the distant expanse. "Ahead lies a war of shadows. Kings will not see it. Empires will not understand it, but the desert will remember." The Falcon from earlier appeared again, gliding effortlessly along the rising winds. It circled above the riders, then angled itself toward the southeast, as if guiding them, or perhaps merely reminding them they were never truly alone beneath this boundless sky. Lawrence inhaled deeply, feeling the desert's breath mingling with his own. He knew that every mile ahead would test him, reshape him, call forth parts of him he did not yet know existed. Yet within that awareness, within the vastness, the uncertainty, there was peace. A quiet surrender to the journey, to the sands, to the destiny that waited just beyond the horizon. The caravan began to descend the ridge. The desert, wide and waiting, received them. By mid-morning, the heat had begun its slow and steady ascent, pressing downward as though the sky itself wished to remind every traveler that mercy was a privilege, not a promise. The caravan's shadows shrank beneath them, dark smudges that clung to their feet before dissolving into the glare. Even the wind, once crisp and cool, grew lazy and warm, drifting in languid currents that carried the smell of sun-baked sand. Their destination was a cluster of ancient wells hidden in a shallow basin, a place known to Bedouin tribes as Ain al-Rimal, the springs of sand. The name itself hinted at paradox, for in the desert, water was both miracle and memory, something that existed only where the land permitted. As they approached the basin, the riders slowed. The dunes sloped downward into a wide hollow where low stone walls encircled the wells, dark against the pale expanse. Wisps of green, thin, stubborn grasses and small thorn shrubs clung to life in the crevices, bending in the light breeze. The air shifted. It became cooler, softer, infused with the faint earthy scent rising from water hidden below. For the Bedouin, this place was sacred. Outer raised a hand, signaling silence. Even the camels quieted, their grumbles fading into gentle huffs. Lawrence dismounted, his boots touching sand that felt subtly different here, denser, moist beneath the upper layer. He knelt beside one of the wells, peering into the shadowed depths. The water glimmered faintly, reflecting a sliver of sky like a narrow blade of light. In this vast emptiness, where life seemed impossible, this pool was a promise of survival and a reminder of how fragile that promise truly was. One of the younger riders, Ferris, approached with a woven bucket. He lowered it carefully, reverently, as though asking permission from the desert itself. When he drew it up, droplets spilled over the edges, darkening the sand in tiny blossoms. Lawrence cupped his hands to drink. The water was cool, startlingly so, and tasted of minerals, stone, and distant storms that had once fallen far from here. As it slid down his throat, he felt his entire body awaken with gratitude. In a land where every drop mattered, this simple act became a communion. Otto watched him with quiet approval. "These wells have saved generations," he said, "but they keep secrets. Battles have been fought over less than a mouthful of this water." Lawrence let the weight of that truth settle. He could feel it in the air, the history layered beneath their feet, the memories of those who had knelt at these same wells, warriors, wanderers, families seeking refuge, enemies seeking advantage. The desert did not choose sides, but it remembered footprints long after the wind had swept them away. Nearby, the Falcon perched atop a crag of stone, feathers ruffling in the warm wind. Its gaze was sharp, unwavering, as though measuring every movement around the wells. Lawrence wondered if the bird saw more than they did, if it sensed currents of change, of conflict, threading through the quiet moment. As the riders refilled water skins and let the camels drink their fill, a hush lingered over the basin. The sun shimmered above them, turning the air into waves of heat that danced over the dunes. Yet beneath the stillness, Lawrence felt something shift, something subtle but unmistakable. A tension, a murmur beneath the silence, the sense that the desert, generous for the moment, was merely pausing, watching, waiting for their next step. For in the secret war they had begun to walk. Even the wells, ancient and unmoving, had a role to play. The midday sun hung heavy above the vast horizon, a blazing white coin pressed against the sky. Heat shimmered over the dunes in trembling waves, blurring the distance into a soft, dreamlike haze. After watering their animals and refilling their skins, the riders began to move again, leaving the calm sanctuary of Ain al-Rimal behind. The silence of the desert returned, stretching wide and unbroken, save for the rhythmic sigh of camels and the whisper of robes brushing against saddles. But as they journeyed deeper into the wilderness, Auda raised a hand, sharp, deliberate. At once the caravan halted, as though the sand itself had seized their feet. The riders scanned the dunes with quiet intensity, their eyes narrowing beneath their keffiyehs. Lawrence felt it too, the subtle shift in the air, the faint disturbance in the stillness. He dismounted, boots sinking softly into the warm sand. The falcon above circled low, wings cutting the heated air in graceful arcs, its cry muted by the vastness. Auda guided his camel toward a slope, then pointed with the tip of his spear. "Look there," he said in a low voice. Lawrence approached and saw them, barely visible, half swallowed by drifting grains, tracks, faint depressions elongated and irregular, stretched from one dune crest to another, not camel prints, not the soft marks left by goats or wandering herds. These were the tracks of horses, fresh. Lawrence squatted, brushing a gloved hand lightly along the edge of one print. The sand was still unsettled. The wind had not yet erased the sharper ridges. Whoever had passed here had done so not long before. "Turkish patrol?" Lawrence asked, though the question tasted unnecessary. Auda's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, or tribes loyal to them. Either way, they watch these wells. We must assume they know we have taken water. The words fell gently, free of urgency or fear, but their weight pressed upon the group like the gathering of distant clouds. The secret war that Lawrence had been sent to nurture, to guide, to ignite, was already present, breathing just beyond sight. The desert, for all its openness, concealed more than it revealed. The riders formed a circle, their camels kneeling to create a living barrier against the sun. Auda called for Faris and two others, speaking in quiet tones. He pointed toward the tracks, then toward the west, where low ridges folded into one another like the rumpled edges of a giant's cloak. The scouts mounted swiftly. Their camels rose in fluid motions, and soon the three figures drifted into the dunes, merging with the shimmering gold landscape until they resembled nothing more than small, shifting shadows. Lawrence remained with Auda. The sheikh studied the land with the patience of a man who had spent his life listening to what the desert whispered beneath the wind. "They test us," Auda finally said. "They want to know our strength, our numbers, our purpose." "And what shall we tell them?" Lawrence asked softly. Auda turned, his eyes lit with the fierce calm of a man unafraid. "We tell them nothing. We let the sand speak for us." A gust of wind blew across the ridge, lifting a veil of fine grains that swirled around their legs. Lawrence watched as the tracks blurred, slowly, delicately, until their edges softened into uncertainty. In a matter of minutes, they would vanish entirely, erased by the desert just as quickly as they had appeared. Auda mounted his camel, and Lawrence followed. The caravan resumed its trek, but now their pace was more deliberate, their silence more attentive. The sense of unseen eyes lingered in the heat, watching from somewhere beyond the dunes. The Falcon soared ahead, gliding toward the southeast. The war, Lawrence realized, was not waiting for them. It was already in motion, drifting like invisible currents through the sands, shaping paths, altering destinies, and leaving only the faintest tracks in the wind. The afternoon deepened, the desert turning hotter, brighter, more immense with every passing mile. Shadows shrank to thin slivers, hiding beneath the camels and clinging to the folds of robes. Yet, despite the heat, The riders pressed on, moving with a steady rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the land itself. The Falcon, silent sentinel of the journey, glided overhead in slow spirals, its shadow passing over the dunes like a drifting omen. Auda led them toward a long ridge rising gently from the flat expanse. Its crest curved like a sleeping serpent, winding across the horizon. The Bedouin called it Jabal al-Huna, the Whispering Ridge, for the way the wind moved through its rocky hollows, creating soft murmurs that sounded almost like voices carried from distant times. As they approached, faint echoes drifted toward them, low, tremulous, haunting. Lawrence paused his camel as the sound washed over him. It was neither threatening nor welcoming. It simply existed, a natural hymn sung by stone and sand. "It is said," Auda murmured, "that the ridge remembers every traveler who has passed here. The wind repeats their footsteps, their words, their fears." Lawrence listened more closely. The sounds were subtle, elusive, whispers rising and falling like breaths released into the heat. For a moment he imagined voices, merchants calling out to their caravans, warriors chanting to steady their courage, wanderers murmuring prayers for safe passage. The desert did not hold memories in the way cities did, carved into walls or written on parchment. Instead, it carried them in the wind, where they could merge, dissolve, and return in fragments. As they climbed the ridge, the wind intensified. It wrapped around them in warm, swirling currents, lifting the edges of keffiyehs and stirring robes into gentle movement. The camels picked their way carefully over the uneven ground, hooves tapping against buried stones. Near the top, Auda signaled a halt. From this high vantage point, the desert unfolded in all directions, an ocean of dunes rolling toward infinity, shimmering beneath the heavy sun. But there was something else too, a shape, a smudge of dark movement far to the east. Lawrence narrowed his eyes. The air distorted the distance, bending light and shifting forms, but after a few seconds he saw it clearly. Riders, small figures at first, but their direction unmistakable. They were following. Turkish horsemen, Auda said calmly, or their allies. His voice held no alarm, as though he were merely observing a natural part of the landscape. They do not hurry, they watch. Lawrence felt a quiet tension settle into his chest, not fear, but awareness, like the tightening of a bowstring. "Do they know who we are?" "Not yet," Auda replied. "But they know we are not wandering without purpose, and that is enough." The wind shifted, rising suddenly into a strong gust that swept across the ridge. Sand lifted in swirling sheets, brushing against their faces like warm fingertips. Through the haze, the distant riders blurred, swallowed partly by the shimmering distance. "They will not approach today," Auda continued. "The desert is our ally this hour. Its light blinds them as much as it blinds us." The caravan began to descend the far side of the ridge. The murmur of the wind softened, fading as they moved lower, replaced once more by the steady sounds of their journey. The groan of leather, the soft huff of camels, the gentle crunch of sand. But the awareness remained. Somewhere behind them, the watchers rode, not close enough to threaten, not far enough to ignore, like a shadow following the sun. And as the whispering ridge disappeared behind them, Lawrence felt the first threads of strategy forming in his mind, threads woven from caution, curiosity, and the quiet promise of a conflict still waiting beneath the horizon. The desert whispered after them, carrying their presence into the wind. By late afternoon, the desert had shifted into its second breath, a slow cooling that softened the hard glare of the sun and cast long, wavering lines of shadow across the dunes. Colors deepened from gold to amber, then to a muted bronze, as though the sands themselves were exhaling after enduring the day's fierce heat. The caravan moved with renewed ease. Camels stretched their necks forward, relieved by the gentler air, while the riders loosened their robes, letting the breeze slip through the fabric like a cool hand. Even the falcon above seemed to glide more lazily now, circling with long, unhurried sweeps of its wings. Yet, for all the softness settling over the land, tension threaded quietly through the group. The watchers were still there, not visible, not near, but felt, as though their presence pressed upon the dunes just beyond sight. The desert had a way of magnifying awareness. Even when no figure could be seen, the riders sensed pursuit in the subtle changes of wind, in the faint disturbances of sand along the horizon, in the careful glances shared between those who read the desert like scripture. Lawrence rode beside Auda, watching the land stretch endlessly outward. "How long will they follow?" he asked. Auda's expression remained calm, unreadable. "As long as they can, as long as we allow them. Men loyal to the Turks are patient. They learn from the desert, they wait." Lawrence considered this quietly. He had studied strategy, tactics, codes of war, but nothing in books had prepared him for this kind of pursuit. No lines on maps, no written doctrines could account for foes who moved like ghosts and landscapes that shifted with every gust of wind. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky with soft pinks and faint purples. As the light faded, the dunes cast longer shadows, shadows that twisted and stretched like dark fingers, creeping slowly across the sand. Some shadows belonged to rocks, others to camels, and a few, Lawrence wasn't entirely sure. The falcon cried once, a sharp call carried cleanly on the breeze. Auda looked up. "The bird sees far. It warns us?" "Of what?" Lawrence asked. "That the day ends, and night brings its own dangers." They continued onward until Auda signaled a brief halt. The riders dismounted and pressed their palms into the sand, feeling for warmth, checking the consistency of the grains. It was a ritual, ancient and instinctive, a way of asking the land how it intended to behave tonight. Ferris approached, his face partially unwrapped, to drink from his water skin. "The watchers," he murmured. "They do not ride at speed. They follow slowly, as if wanting us to know." Auda nodded. "To unsettle us, to make us waste strength worrying." "Does it unsettle you?" Lawrence asked. Auda smiled faintly, a smile that seemed carved from the same granite as his spirit. "No. The desert teaches patience. It teaches that fear is a choice." Lawrence felt those words settle into him like cool water. Fear was a choice, and tonight he would choose vigilance instead. As the caravan moved again, the air shifted with the changing light. Shadows lengthened, deepening into blue pools between the dunes. The sky above stretched wide and open, softening from fiery orange into the first hints of twilight. Night would come soon, and with it, new challenges. Behind them, beyond the next ridge, the unseen riders continued their quiet pursuit, never visible, never close, but always present, like a thought that would not leave the mind. The desert swallowed their tracks, the wind carried their breath, and the sun drifted slowly toward the edge of the world. Evening settled over the desert, like a veil of indigo silk, soft and cool after the long burn of day. The last light of the sun dipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind a lingering glow that shimmered across the dunes. Shadows pooled in the hollows, stretching into deep, serene blue as the world shifted gently toward night. The caravan pressed on until the heat finally broke, replaced by a tender breeze that swept across the land with the hush of a whispered blessing. The camels sighed, grateful, and the riders straightened in their saddles as the air grew lighter, easier to breathe. Above them, the sky transformed. Stars appeared gradually at first, tiny pin pricks of silver scattered across a vast darkening canvas. Then suddenly they spilled forth in rivers and clusters more numerous and radiant than Lawrence had ever seen in his life. Without the smoke of cities, without the clutter of lamps, the night sky blazed with ancient brilliance, as though every star wished to guide them. Lawrence lifted his gaze, feeling the quiet majesty of it settle over him. "It is like looking upon the beginning of the world," he murmured. Auda, riding at his side, nodded. "This is why our people trust the night. It reveals truth. It shows the paths hidden by the day." The wind shifted again, cool, steady, carrying the scent of distant stone and the faint mineral tang of unseen wells or rock formations. The desert came alive in the darkness, not with noise but with presence. The silence felt different now, deeper, layered with subtle sounds, the soft creak of saddles, the rhythmic breath of camels, the faint rustle of sand sliding down a dune slope. Far behind them, beyond the rolling ridges, the unseen watchers continued their quiet pursuit. At night, they would move more slowly. Horses struggled more in darkness than camels. Still, the knowledge of them lingered like a weight at the back of the mind, never oppressive but constant. The riders reached a narrow valley between two tall dunes where the wind swept clean and calm. Auda raised his hand. "We camp here tonight." The camels knelt, legs folding with soft thuds into the sand. Riders dismounted, shaking stiffness from their limbs. Fires were not lit, too dangerous, too revealing. Instead, they worked in the dim starlight, setting out blankets, anchoring small tents, and arranging gear in practiced, near-silent routine. Lawrence knelt beside his bedroll and let his fingers sift through the sand. It was cool now, silky, slipping between his fingers like water. The desert felt gentler at night, almost affectionate. Yet he knew this softness was only one face of its many moods. Auda approached and sat beside him. "You watch the horizon," he said. "You feel the weight of those who follow?" Lawrence nodded. "Their presence is like a shadow I cannot see, but I feel it." "That is good," Auda replied. "Feeling is a weapon here. In the desert, your senses will guide you more than your eyes." He lifted his chin toward the ridge. "They will not attack tonight. The night belongs to us. The camels see in darkness. The horses do not." Far above, the Falcon, unexpectedly awake at this hour, circled once beneath the starlight, its silhouette gliding across the sky. Lawrence watched its movement with quiet awe. Even the bird seemed restless, as though aware of the delicate tension lingering over the sands. As the riders settled down, the desert grew quieter still. The air cooled, the wind softened, and the stars lowered themselves gently upon the world, glowing with ancient calm. Lawrence lay back, letting the vast sky fill his vision. The worries of the day drifted away, replaced by a single, steady thought. The desert is testing me. But it was not a cruel test. It was a shaping, a refining, a whisper from the sands that destiny was unfolding around him, grain by grain, mile by mile. He closed his eyes, letting the night cradle him. The watchers moved somewhere in the distance, but the desert, for now, held him safely in its vast embrace. The moon rose slowly, as if pulled upward by invisible threads woven through the night sky. Its pale light spilled across the desert in long ribbons, turning the dunes into soft silver hills and casting gentle shadows that swayed with the shifting wind. The air felt cooler now, clean, almost sweet, and every breath Lawrence took seemed to settle deeper in his chest. The riders lay scattered across the small valley, shapes wrapped in blankets, their forms rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Camels dozed nearby, long necks folded gracefully, eyelids flickering as though dreaming of endless sand and silent horizons. But Lawrence could not sleep. The moonlit desert held a strange magnetism, a stillness that pulled at his thoughts. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb the others, and stepped away from the camp. The sand beneath his bare feet was cool, giving softly with each step. The night was so calm that the faint crunch of shifting grains seemed almost loud to him. He climbed a small dune, drawn to its crest by instinct more than purpose. From there, the desert stretched before him in waves of shimmering silver, the land as peaceful as a resting giant. And yet, something hummed beneath the surface, not sound, not movement, a presence. As he stood there, the wind lifted gently, brushing across his face like a ghostly hand. It carried with it a whisper. Not words, nothing so clear, but a sensation like remembering something he had never lived through, a tug of familiarity in a place he had barely begun to understand. Aura approached quietly, his footsteps barely a rustle on the sand. "You feel it," he said, not as a question, but a knowing observation. Lawrence turned slightly. "What is it?" Aura came to stand beside him, folding his arms across his chest as he gazed out over the silver dunes. "The desert has many voices. Most men hear only wind, but some hear more." Lawrence listened again, letting the silence stretch around him. And in that silence he sensed something layered beneath the calm, a deep, ancient weight, like the echo of forgotten footsteps. Otto continued, his voice low and steady. "My father used to say the desert remembers the souls of those who walked it. Warriors, wanderers, lovers, all their stories sink into the sands. Sometimes the wind touches those stories, and they stir beneath the moon." Lawrence felt a shiver, not of fear, but of awe. "And tonight? What is stirring?" "Change," Otto replied. "Your arrival, the watchers behind us, the tribes waking to a new purpose. The desert feels such things long before men do." The wind shifted, cooler now, and the faint whisper rose again, soft, almost melodic. Lawrence closed his eyes, letting the sensation wash over him. It was as if the desert itself were breathing around him, alive and ancient. "You hear it clearly," Otto said, studying him. "Not all outsiders do." Lawrence opened his eyes. "Perhaps because I don't feel like an outsider." Otto smiled faintly, the moonlight catching the edges of his features. "Not anymore." They stood together in silence, two figures on the crest of a dune beneath the vast, glittering sky. Below them the camp slept peacefully, unaware of the subtle currents weaving themselves through the night. Then, from far off, almost beyond hearing, a faint sound drifted across the sand. A hoofbeat, soft, distant, then another. Lawrence tensed, turning toward the dark horizon. The watchers had not stopped. Even in the night they tested the distance between them. Aura placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Do not worry. They will not come close tonight. They want us to know they are there. That is all." But as the hoofbeats faded back into silence, Lawrence felt something shift inside him. A crack in the stillness, a spark of understanding. The watchers were not merely following, they were waiting. And whatever waited with them, the desert had already sensed. Below, the wind whispered again, soft as a lullaby. Far above, the Falcon circled once in the moonlight, silent, ghost-like, before gliding toward the distant dark. The night deepened into a quiet so complete it felt almost sacred. Stars shimmered overhead in brilliant constellations, and the moon cast its pale glow across the valley where the riders slept. Lawrence remained awake longer than he intended, his thoughts drifting between the distant watchers, the whispers of the dunes, and the uncanny pull he felt toward the desert itself. Eventually, exhaustion wove through him, gentle as a slow-moving tide. He returned to his bedroll, wrapped himself in the soft fabric, and allowed the weight of the desert night to lull him into sleep. But dawn came swiftly. The first light crept over the dunes like fingers of gold, brushing softly against the sand, warming it grain by grain. Lawrence stirred before the others, awakened by some instinct he couldn't name. The air felt different, not dangerous, just charged, as though the world had shifted while they slept. He rose quietly and stepped away from the camp, inhaling the cool freshness of early morning. The sky glowed with soft hues of lavender and rose, blending into the endless horizon. Camels murmured low, stretching their long necks as they prepared for the day's journey. Then he saw something. On the far edge of the valley, where the wind had brushed a smooth canvas across the sand, there were marks, delicate, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. Lawrence knelt beside them, footprints, camel prints. But these were not from their own camp. A message had been left in the night. The prints circled near the ridge, never crossing into the camp's boundary. Their arrangement was purposeful, close enough to be seen with morning light, distant enough not to disturb, a sign that someone had approached, watched, judged, and then withdrawn. Auda approached silently, his robe catching the newborn light in soft folds. "So," he murmured, "they came closer than we thought." Lawrence nodded, his fingers tracing the faint depressions. "They wanted us to find this." "Yes," Auda agreed, "so a warning or a greeting. It depends on the heart of the one who left it." The sand around the footprints held a subtle pattern, as though the rider had paused, turned his horse, and lingered for a time before retreating. Lawrence studied it carefully. He hesitated, Lawrence said softly. Whoever it was, they weren't scouting, they were waiting. Auda's eyes narrowed with thought. Perhaps they wished to see our numbers, or perhaps they wished for us to know theirs. Behind them, the rest of the riders began to wake. The valley filled with soft sounds, quiet conversations, the rustle of tents, the gentle stretching of limbs long traveled. The peaceful rhythm of morning contrasted sharply with the silent message in the sand. Ferris approached, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What did you find?" Auda gestured to the markings. "Visitors in the night." Ferris's expression tightened. "Close?" "Closer than comfort," Auda replied, though his tone held no fear, only calm observation. The desert wind shifted, stirring grains of sand around the footprints. Slowly, the marks began to blur, smoothed by nature's patient hand. Lawrence realized that within minutes the message would fade completely, erased by the same land that revealed it. Auda watched the prints dissolve. That is the way of the desert. It shows you only what you need to see, and never for long. Lawrence stood, brushing sand from his hands. "What do we do now?" Auda turned toward the rising sun. "We continue, but with sharper eyes. The watchers have made their presence known. The next move is ours. or perhaps the deserts. As the last of the prints faded into nothingness, the falcon appeared once more, gliding effortlessly on the morning wind. It passed over the valley, its shadow fleeting across the sand, then soared toward the southeast, where dunes rose like waves frozen in mid-swell. Lawrence followed its path with his eyes, sensing that the falcon, too, was guiding them toward something yet unseen, something waiting like buried treasure beneath the sands of destiny. The riders began to mount, the day's journey called, and the desert, ever patient, waited to reveal its next secret. The sun emerged fully now, rising with a gentle brilliance that softened the edges of the dunes and cast long, golden sweeps across the land. Morning in the desert always carried a moment of grace, a pause between the cool tenderness of night and the burning ferocity that midday would bring. The riders moved swiftly to take advantage of this brief, forgiving hour. Auda led them eastward, toward a region known only to certain tribes, and whispered in stories as the Path of Hidden Wells. These wells were not marked on any map. They existed only in memory, passed down through families who navigated the desert for generations. To find them without guidance was nearly impossible, like searching for a single star in a moonless sky. But Auda knew the way. The caravan traveled in a loose formation, camels swaying gently, their footsteps barely disturbing the quiet morning. Lawrence rode near the front, scanning the horizon, noting ridges, shadows, and shifts in the wind. Every detail mattered now. Their unseen watchers had grown bolder, moving in the night, leaving messages in the sand. Each hour brought them deeper into territory where allies and enemies intertwined like threads in an intricate weave. The desert widened before them like an ocean without shore. The dunes rose higher, sculpted by wind into elegant spines and sweeping arcs. The heat had not yet arrived in full force, but the air already shimmered faintly around the edges of distance. Auda pointed ahead. The first well lies beyond that ridge, but it is shy, hidden. You cannot see it until you stand almost beside it. Shy? Lawrence echoed with a slight smile. Auda nodded. The desert hides what it cherishes. As they approached the ridge, Lawrence noticed an unusual pattern in the sand, subtle dips and curves, as if the wind itself had been persuaded to shape the land differently here. Shadows pooled in the hollow between two dunes, darker and cooler than the surrounding terrain. When they crested the ridge, the hidden well revealed itself not with grandeur, but with quiet humility. It lay at the base of a stone outcrop, surrounded by patches of stubborn desert grass and a few low shrubs whose leaves glimmered with tiny droplets of dew. A cluster of rocks formed a natural enclosure, sheltering the well from drifting sand. Ferris let out a soft breath of surprise. "It is beautiful," he murmured, as though speaking too loudly might disturb it. Lawrence dismounted and approached the well slowly. The scent of moisture, faint, earthy, rose from the cool opening. When he peered inside, he saw water deeper than expected, reflecting a sliver of sky. Auda knelt beside him. "This well is known to only a handful of tribes. It has saved many lives, and taken some." Lawrence looked up. "Taken?" Auda's eyes deepened with memory. "Conflicts over water are older than empires. Men have died here. Some still wander the dunes because they spilled blood too close to sacred ground." The wind shifted gently, stirring the shrubs and carrying a quiet rustle through the air like soft sighs. Lawrence sensed history here, layer upon layer beneath the silence. The riders began to draw water, moving with quiet efficiency. Camels lowered their long necks, drinking deeply. Ferris refilled water skins with practiced care, every drop a treasure. But as Lawrence stood, something caught his eye on the ridge behind them, a flicker of movement, so small it could have been a mirage. He narrowed his gaze, focusing through the heat's shimmering veil. Nothing. Only the vast ridgeline, still and golden under the rising sun. But the feeling remained, a subtle pressure, like being observed through a crack in the world. Auda approached. "You see something?" "Maybe," Lawrence said quietly. "Or maybe the desert plays tricks." Auda nodded slowly. "It does, but your instincts grow sharper. Trust them." As the riders finished gathering water, the Falcon swooped low over the well, gliding effortlessly on the morning wind. Its wings cast a fleeting shadow across the opening, a shadow that rippled over the water like a dark whisper. Lawrence watched the bird climb into the sky again, feeling the familiar pull in his chest. The desert seemed to speak through that falcon, guiding them deeper into its hidden heart. Beyond the well, the dunes stretched endlessly, waiting, watching, shimmering with secrets, and somewhere out there, the watchers continued their silent pursuit. By the time the riders left the hidden well behind, the sun had risen fully, transforming the cool tenderness of morning into the first pulse of approaching heat. The air thickened with warmth, shimmering above the sand in restless waves. Shadows shrank, sounds grew softer, and the great hush of the desert seemed to deepen, withholding its breath in the rising heat. The caravan moved in a careful rhythm, conserving their strength for the long hours ahead. Camels swayed with steady grace, their steps unhurried. The riders shaded their faces beneath wide folds of cloth, eyes narrowed against the bright glare. Lawrence felt the first touch of harsh sunlight on the back of his neck. Already the heat was gathering, simmering like a pot over a flame. The desert, so gentle by night and dawn, was now preparing to reveal its harsher face. Auda glanced toward the sky. "The light is strong today," he murmured. "Too strong." Ferris rode closer. "Do you sense something, Sheikh?" Auda nodded slowly. "The heat is too quick. The wind is too still. When the desert grows quiet like this in the early hours, it is thinking." Lawrence tilted his head, listening. There was indeed a silence, a deeper one than usual, not peaceful, expectant, heavy. "What does it think about?" he asked. Auda gave a thin smile. "Whether to test us?" The heat tightened its grip as they continued eastward. The dunes blurred slightly, their outlines trembling in the rising light. The horizon wavered like a reflection on water. Sweat trickled beneath Lawrence's robes, dampening the fabric against his skin. Then he felt it, a faint tremor in the air. Not a sound, not a movement, a pressure, a shift. The desert was no longer merely hot. It was holding something inside its vast body, something waiting to be released. Auda halted the caravan with a raised hand. "We stop here." The riders obeyed at once, grateful for the pause. Camels knelt, groaning softly. The men took shallow breaths, conserving energy. "What is it?" Faris asked quietly. "The desert is preparing a storm," Auda said. "Not of wind, not yet. A storm beneath the heat." Lawrence frowned slightly. "A sandstorm?" "Perhaps," Auda answered, "or something subtler. The desert has storms you cannot see, only feel." The riders huddled in the narrow shade offered by their camels, shielding their faces. The air grew heavier still, pressing down like a giant invisible hand. Heat pulsed upward from the ground, rising in shimmering currents that blurred everything beyond a few hundred meters. The Falcon appeared suddenly, swooping low across the dunes and circling above the caravan. Its wings beat faster than usual, its pattern tighter, more urgent. Otto watched the bird with a tightening jaw. The falcon feels it too. Lawrence wiped sweat from his brow. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the desert itself were pulling breath into its depths and holding it. No sound reached them, not a whisper of wind, not a call of an animal, nothing. And then faintly, like the first breath before a sigh, a whisper. The heat shifted. The silence broke. A soft wind touched the edge of Lawrence's robe, brushing across his skin with trembling uncertainty. It wasn't a cool wind. It carried warmth, dust, and tension. Ferris rose halfway. "Is that the storm?" Otto shook his head slowly. "No, this is the warning." The wind grew slightly stronger, curling around the camels, tugging gently at the riders' clothing. Sand lifted in tiny spirals. The horizon grew hazy, the blue sky fading into a pale, uncertain hue. Lawrence felt a chill despite the heat. Something was coming, something vast, ancient, inevitable. He turned toward Otto. "Should we take shelter?" "Not yet," Otto whispered. "We listen, we watch." The breeze trembled, the sand quivered. The desert shifted its great weight, and far out on the horizon, like a creature waking beneath the earth, a low rumble began to rise. The storm had not yet shown its face, but its breath was already upon them. The rumble on the horizon deepened, soft, distant, and resonant, like the sound of a massive drum being struck beneath layers of sand. It was not thunder, it was not wind. It was something older, something the desert carried within its bones. The riders stood in uneasy stillness, their faces half-covered, eyes narrowed. Even the camels grew restless, shifting their weight and snorting as though sensing a change too subtle for human perception. Lawrence felt it through the soles of his boots, a faint vibration, a tremor that pulsed through the ground in rhythmic waves. The sand beneath him seemed alive, quivering with a low hum that pressed into his chest. Ferris whispered, "Is it an earthquake?" Otto shook his head. "No. Listen carefully." The vibration strengthened, slowly, steadily, until it became not just something felt, but something heard. A soft, deep note rose into the air. Then another, and another, a song. A low, resonant moan that wavered like the sound of a distant horn drifting across empty space. It grew in depth, swirling between the dunes, echoing in strange patterns that made it impossible to tell where it came from. Lawrence nearly stopped breathing. The dunes were singing. Otto's face softened with an expression that was neither fear nor surprise, only solemn recognition. This is the voice of the desert. Few outsiders hear it. Fewer still survive what follows. Lawrence listened more closely. The sound was mesmerizing, its tone both haunting and beautiful. It reminded him of wind passing through the narrow halls of ancient ruins, or the deep resonance of a cathedral organ, but deeper, older, braided with the soul of the land itself. "What does it mean?" Lawrence asked. "It means the sands are shifting," Otto replied quietly. "Something beneath them has awakened." The wind picked up, not cold, but warm and dry, carrying grains of sand that brushed against their skin like tiny sparks. The singing grew louder, lifting and lowering in slow waves, until the entire desert seemed to vibrate. The falcon soared overhead in rapid, distressed circles, letting out sharp cries. Lawrence shaded his eyes, scanning the horizon. "Is it a sandstorm?" "Not a storm of wind," Otto murmured. "A storm of the earth." The thought was unsettling, but Lawrence waited. Otto knew this land better than anyone alive. Then, without warning, a large dune to the east shifted. Not a collapse, not an avalanche. A movement, smooth and fluid, like a beast rolling in its sleep. Sand rippled down its side in slow cascades. Another dune trembled, and another. The singing intensified, now joined by a soft rushing sound, like thousands of grains sliding down unseen slopes. The air thickened with shimmering dust. Ferris stepped closer to Otta. "Is this dangerous?" "If we stand still, yes," Otta said. "We must move with the desert, not against it." He mounted his camel in one smooth motion and gestured urgently. "Ride! Follow the low ground, the dunes are shifting. If we stay, we will be swallowed." The riders sprang into action. Lawrence mounted quickly, gripping the saddle as his camel rose. Sand whipped at his legs. The warm wind grew stronger. The dunes around them began to move, not collapsing, but sliding in slow, immense waves. It was as if the whole landscape were rearranging itself, reshaping its curves and ridges. The singing continued, vibrating through the air with eerie beauty. Lawrence shouted over the growing hum, "How long will this last?" Otta urged his camel forward, "Until the desert is satisfied." They rode along the trough between two shifting dunes, moving swiftly but carefully. The ground trembled beneath them, sometimes subtly, sometimes more violently. Long veils of sand lifted around them, glowing gold in the bright sun. The Falcon guided them from above, circling, swooping, rising, its movement sharp and deliberate, as though showing them the safest path. Behind them, a dune slumped heavily, sending a slow river of sand cascading downward. Ahead the path opened, the singing softened, the vibrations diminished. And slowly the desert calmed, breathing once more in its ancient measured rhythm. Otta drew his camel to a stop. The riders formed a loose circle, panting quietly, eyes wide with awe. Ferris exhaled shakily. "I thought the earth would swallow us." "It might have," Otta said, "if we hadn't listened." Lawrence looked back at the dunes they had crossed. They appeared unchanged now, quiet, eternal, serene, as though nothing had happened at all, but he knew better. The desert had revealed one of its many voices, and it had tested them. He felt its message settle inside him like a stone placed gently in his hand. "You walk here by my permission." The wind carried the final echo of the dune's song across the vast horizon. And then, silence. When the desert finally stilled, the heat settled over the land again like a heavy blanket. But something in the air had changed, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable to those who lived by instinct. The dunes no longer trembled, the earth no longer hummed, but a strange clarity seemed to hang across the horizon, as though the world had been washed clean by the unseen storm beneath the sand. Otta lifted his gaze toward the sky just as the Falcon circled low, cutting a sharp arc above the caravan. Its wings glinted in the sun, feathers shimmering with each smooth beat. Then, with sudden purpose, the bird turned eastward and soared in a long, decisive line. Ferris shaded his eyes. "It wants us to follow." "Not wants," Otta said. "Shows." Lawrence felt that familiar pull in his chest, the same one he felt whenever the bird appeared, as if some invisible thread connected them. Fate, or instinct, or something deeper buried in the sands. The Falcon was not merely a bird, it was becoming a guide, a silent companion moving ahead through the mystery surrounding their journey. The caravan resumed its pace, following the Falcon's direction. The ground grew firmer as they traveled, sand giving way to a mixture of stone and packed earth. The dunes spread out more widely, leaving pockets of open space that allowed them to ride in a broader formation. The shifting sands behind them softened into memory. Lawrence rode beside Otta. Do you believe the Falcon leads us somewhere specific? Auda's expression was thoughtful. In the desert, signs are everywhere. A man must learn which are chance and which are destiny. And this one? Auda smiled faintly. This one has followed us since the wells. It is no longer chance. They rode for hours, the sun climbing higher and the heat intensifying until the horizon trembled with the shimmer of light. But the Falcon kept its steady course, occasionally disappearing behind a ridge before reappearing with a graceful dive or silent glide. Around midday they came upon something unexpected. Faris was the first to see it, a shape half buried in the sand, glinting faintly in the harsh sunlight. He dismounted quickly and hurried toward it. Lawrence and Auda followed on foot, sand crunching beneath their boots. The object lay in a shallow depression, curved and metallic, its surface weathered by time but unmistakably crafted. Lawrence knelt, brushing aside sand to reveal more of it. A stirrup, worn smooth, bent slightly at the edge, but still usable. Auda joined him, eyes narrowing. Turkish cavalry, Lawrence studied the metal. Dropped recently? Faris shook his head. Not too long ago, maybe a few days. The wind has not buried it fully. The Falcon swooped low again, its shadow gliding over the depression before rising sharply. Auda looked to the sky. It wants us to see this. Lawrence felt a tightening in his chest. A clue? A warning, Auda replied. They mounted once more and continued following the Falcon's trail. Before long they encountered more signs. A torn scrap of saddle leather tangled around a thorn bush, a faint line in the sand, marking where a heavy object had been dragged, a set of hoof prints, faint, nearly erased by wind, but still traceable. The watchers. They had passed this way. The Falcon led them to a ridge where the land fell away into a wide basin. Shadows pooled there, dark and cool against the blazing light above. At the base of the basin, something shimmered, metal or cloth, or perhaps water reflecting the sky. Lawrence leaned forward in his saddle, heart steady but alert. What is that? Auda squinted. A camp, or what remains of one. The Falcon glided downward, disappearing behind the ridge. Auda exhaled slowly. The desert unveils what it chooses, and today it chooses truth. They descended toward the basin, the silence growing deeper with each step. The air cooled slightly, shadows lengthening, shapes sharpening. Lawrence felt the weight of the moment settle over him like a mantle. Something waits below, something left behind, something the watchers did not intend for eyes like theirs to see. The Falcon perched upon a jagged rock, watching them approach. Its presence felt like a key unlocking a door. Auda signaled the riders to slow. In the hollow below, the story of the Watchers was about to reveal its first true chapter. The basin lay quiet, still and strangely serene under the midday sun, but there was a tension in the air, a subtle heaviness that made even the camels pause before descending fully into the hollow. Lawrence felt it first as a tug in the center of his chest, a whisper of caution woven into the warm breeze. Auda raised a hand, signaling the caravan to slow their approach. Their formation tightened as they navigated the slope, careful not to dislodge too much sand. The Falcon sat motionless on the rock above, its sharp eyes tracking their every movement as though measuring the moment. When they reached the floor of the basin, the remnants of the camp became clear. Small patches of disturbed sand, scattered ashes from a fire extinguished hastily, footprints half erased by wind but still decipherable to trained eyes, a broken clay water jug, a length of rope torn at one end, and near the center, a dark piece of fabric fluttering weakly in the wind. Lawrence dismounted, moving with slow, deliberate steps. The silence around them thickened. No insects, no birds, not even the faint whine of shifting grains. Only the soft rasp of their breaths broke the stillness. Auda knelt beside the ashes. "This fire was put out before dawn," he murmured, still warm beneath the surface. Ferris crouched beside a set of footprints. 4 men, maybe 5. They rode horses, heavy ones. "And they left fast," Lawrence added. Auda nodded. Something alarmed them. The piece of fabric caught Lawrence's attention. It lay tangled against a thorny shrub, dark blue, with a faint symbol stitched in red, half buried, half exposed. He lifted it gently, brushing away the sand. Auda inhaled sharply. "That is Ottoman cavalry cloth." Lawrence's pulse quickened. So, this was a patrol camp. "Not only a patrol," Auda said, voice low. "Look." He pointed to the ground. A drag mark, long and uneven, leading away from the camp toward a narrow passage between 2 stone outcrops. The sand was disturbed as though something heavy had been pulled across it, or someone. Ferris swallowed hard. "A prisoner?" Auda's face hardened. Perhaps, or a man wounded. But they did not leave willingly. The Falcon screeched once, sharply, as if urging them to continue their investigation. Lawrence followed the drag mark a few steps before it vanished into firmer ground. The trail ended abruptly on rocky soil, where no footprint remained. He crouched, touching the stone. It was still warm from the sun, but there was a faint residue, a smear of something dark, dried and flaking. Blood. He stood slowly. Someone was hurt here. Badly. Auda joined him, looking into the narrow passageway. Shadows lay thick between the rocks, deepening into darkness where the sun could not reach. "We proceed carefully," the sheikh said. "The watchers may still be close." As they moved deeper into the narrow passage, the ground cooled beneath their feet. Stone walls rose on either side, streaked with mineral lines and weathered by centuries of wind. The air here carried a different quality, still dry but tinged with the faint scent of iron and dust. Lawrence paused when he spotted something small wedged in a crack of the stone, a fragment of wood. He pulled it free. A broken arrow shaft. Ottoman design. Auda's expression darkened. There was a fight. The deeper they went, the more evidence they found. Small, scattered signs of struggle. A bent horseshoe nail. Scratches along the stone where metal had scraped. A few grains of gunpowder clinging to the wall. And finally, at the passage's end, a discarded water skin. Split open, its contents long since dried. Ferris turned to Auda. "Sheikh, why would they leave so quickly? If they had a prisoner, why abandon the camp?" Auda looked toward the far ridge, where the horizon shimmered with heat. "Because they were afraid. Something spooked them, something stronger than thirst or duty." Lawrence glanced back toward the basin. "The singing dunes?" Auda shook his head. "No, this happened before that. The dunes sang later. This was caused by something closer." The Falcon swooped down into the passage, landing on a stone near Lawrence's shoulder. Its talons gripped the rock with still intensity. Its eyes gleamed alert, almost urgent. Auda watched the bird carefully. "It wants to show us more." Lawrence stepped past the final rock, emerging onto a ridge that overlooked the eastern expanse of the desert. And there, far in the distance, something broke the perfect continuity of the land. A cluster of dark shapes, motionless, half buried. unearthed by wind or chance. Otto followed his gaze, and his voice dropped to a hushed whisper. Bodies. The watchers had not simply abandoned their camp. They had been driven from it, violently. The desert, once silent, seemed to lean closer, as if waiting for them to discover the rest of the story buried in its sands. The ridge dropped away into a vast stretch of sand, glowing fiercely under the afternoon sun. Yet, even from this distance, the dark shapes scattered across the slope were unmistakable, forms too rigid to be resting, too still to belong to anything living. The riders approached slowly, a somber quiet settling over them like a shroud. Even the camels moved with a gentler tread, as though sensing the gravity of what lay ahead. The falcon circled once above the fallen shapes, then perched on a jagged stone, its feathers rustling softly in the warm wind. Lawrence dismounted first. The sand grew strangely cool underfoot as they neared the bodies, as if the desert itself dimmed its heat in reverence or warning. Otto approached one of the forms, knelt. His expression hardened, though not with cruelty, rather with the solemn recognition of an old warrior who had witnessed too many endings. Ottoman cavalry uniforms, scattered weapons, a few loose cartridges gleaming like tiny beads in the sand. Lawrence crouched beside another body, noticing details through the drifting grains, a shattered rifle stock, boots worn smooth by long travel, a torn sleeve stained dark with dried blood. The man's expression, though stiffened by death, held a look not of anger, but of fear. Eyes partially open, staring toward the west, toward the direction of the abandoned camp. Ferris swallowed. Did they fight each other? Auda shook his head. No. See their wounds. Lawrence leaned closer. Several bodies showed similar injuries, clean cuts, precise as if struck by sharp blades, moving with astonishing speed. But there were no footprints belonging to attackers, no tracks from horses or camels, no sign of an ambush, only the stillness of the desert. What could have done this? Ferris whispered. Auda's voice was low, heavy with certainty. Men, but not many. A small group, skilled and fast. Tribal fighters? Lawrence asked. Possibly, Auda said, but the tribes here do not strike without warning, and they would take horses, weapons, anything of value. These men were left exactly where they fell. Lawrence felt a cold ripple move through him. Then whoever did this wasn't after supplies. No, Auda murmured. They were sending a message. The falcon screeched above them, feathers rippling in a sudden gust. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of iron, dust, and something older, like the breath of an ancient cavern beneath the earth. Lawrence stood scanning the dunes. Could the watchers be the same men who attacked them? Auda considered this with a furrowed brow. If they are, then they follow us not out of curiosity, but purpose. The idea settled uneasily among the group. Lawrence's heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with the awareness that the invisible threads around them were tightening. The desert was weaving them toward something. He walked a short distance beyond the bodies, where the dunes sloped sharply downward. There, half buried in sand, he found something else, a leather-bound satchel. The flap was torn, its contents scattered. He retrieved a few items, a piece of parchment with Arabic writing, partially smeared but still legible, a compass, cracked, a small metal insignia, Ottoman military issue, and a thin cord bracelet braided from red and gold thread. Auda recognized it immediately. That bracelet belongs to tribes of the eastern frontier, but they do not ally with the Turks. Then why would an Ottoman soldier carry it? Lawrence asked. Because someone gave it to him, Auda replied. Or someone took it from him before he died. The wind rose again, brushing sand over the bodies, beginning the slow process of reclaiming them. In a day or two, perhaps less, they would vanish completely beneath shifting grains. The desert permitted these men only a brief moment of witness. Lawrence felt a quiet reverence settle over him. We should mark this place. Auda nodded and drew a simple symbol in the sand, two lines crossing like the branches of a palm. A sign of respect in Bedouin custom to honor the spirits of those who died far from home. Ferris bowed his head. The others followed. When the wind softened once more, Auda spoke quietly. Whatever force did this is not far. The desert is stirring, and the watchers, they ride with purpose. Lawrence gazed eastward, where the dunes rose like silent waves under the vast sky. Somewhere out there, hidden by distance and heat, their unseen companions were making their next move. And the desert, ancient and watchful, waited for Lawrence to take the next step in a story far larger than any single man. The riders left the fallen soldiers behind with quiet steps, allowing the desert to reclaim what it had already begun to swallow. But as they rode eastward, the air grew cooler, the breeze steadier, as though guiding them toward something hidden just beyond the known horizon. The Falcon led the way once more. It circled above the dunes, gliding with unusual purpose, sometimes pausing in the air as if waiting for the caravan to catch up. Each time the bird dipped its wings, Auda shifted their course slightly. The desert's own compass seemed to move through feather and instinct. Before long, the dunes began to change shape. Their smooth curves gave way to jagged stone outcrops, jutting from the sand like the spine of an ancient creature. Lawrence felt the air alter as well, cooler here, touched by shadows even in the bright day. Auda slowed his camel. "This is old ground," he murmured. "My grandfather brought me here once, a place few speak of." Ferris leaned closer. "Dangerous?" Auda shook his head. "Not dangerous. Unusual." They entered a narrow gorge carved by centuries of wind. The stone walls rose on either side, streaked in dark veins and pale mineral bands that shimmered faintly when sunlight touched them. The air echoed softly with each step the camels took, creating a rhythm like distant drums. At the end of the gorge, a wide, dark opening appeared. Cool air drifting out from its interior like the breath of a sleeping giant. A cave! The Falcon swooped down, landing at the mouth of the opening, its claws gripping the stone with delicate precision. It turned its head toward the riders, watching them intently. Auda's voice dropped to a near whisper. "It remembers." Lawrence dismounted, feeling the temperature shift. The heat of the desert fell away, replaced by an earthy chill. The others followed quietly, each step echoing softly in the cave's chamber. Inside, the cave opened into a vast hollow, lit only by slanting beams of light that slipped through cracks in the roof. Dust floated in the still air like drifting stars. Shadows stretched long and deep along the uneven floor, but what drew their eyes were the walls. Paintings, hundreds of them, faded, ancient, etched into the stone with pigments of clay and crushed minerals. Figures riding camels, others walking with spears and banners, birds, falcons, always falcons, drawn with wings outstretched, lines tracing battles, migrations, gatherings of tribes, and symbols, spirals, waves, eyes, stars, woven into the scenes like fragments of forgotten language. Ferris stepped closer. "Who made these?" Auda removed his headscarf, letting the cool air brush his hair. "The desert people, our ancestors, those who crossed these lands long before any empire claimed it." Lawrence traced a finger near, but not touching, a painting of a man and a bird standing together beneath a crescent moon. These look coordinated, like a story. Oda nodded. Many stories. The cave is known in old tales as Gar al-Vilal, the Cave of Shadows. It is said the walls show moments when the desert intervened in the affairs of men. Lawrence's gaze lingered on one particular painting, a group of riders fleeing across the dunes, another group pursuing them, and above them a falcon guiding the chase. His breath caught. "Oda," he whispered, This looks like us." Oda joined him, eyes narrowing. "It cannot be us. These drawings are older than the tribes themselves." Ferris shivered. "Then how?" Oda studied the painting more closely. "The desert repeats its patterns. A predator, a chase, a guide. It is the cycle of the land. What has happened before will happen again." Lawrence felt an eerie calm settle over him, like a hand resting gently on his shoulder. "So our path was walked before." Oda placed a hand on the wall. "Yes? And these figures," he gestured to the falcon, "always lead toward something important." Deeper inside the cave, where the light barely reached, Lawrence saw another painting, this one almost hidden by time. It showed a lone figure standing atop a high ridge looking down on a vast battlefield. Beneath him, two armies clashed. Above him, a falcon perched on his shoulder. The figure's face was faded, but the posture, the stance, something about it stirred recognition in Lawrence, as if the cave itself whispered, "Pay attention." Oda touched Lawrence's arm. "We should leave. This place holds knowledge, but it also holds memory, and memory can weigh too heavily if one lingers." Lawrence nodded and stepped backward into the brighter part of the cave. The falcon, sensing their movement, fluttered to the entrance and waited. As they exited the cave, the warm desert light washed over them again. The wind lifted, carrying the scent of sand and sun. Oda spoke softly. "The cave has shown us what it wished. Now the desert will show us the rest." Lawrence looked back once more. In the darkness, the ancient painting seemed to glow faintly, as though still alive with stories waiting to awaken. But the desert's next chapter lay ahead, etched not in stone, but in living sand. The falcon took flight, and the riders followed. The moment they stepped beyond the cave shadow, the desert light seemed brighter than before, sharper, almost cleansing, as though the world outside had been waiting to welcome them back into its vast, open silence. The air had warmed again, but it carried a new clarity, a thin crispness that lingered on the tongue like cold metal. The falcon soared ahead, circling once before gliding eastward with smooth, effortless precision. Oda watched the bird closely. "It knows where we must go," he said quietly. Lawrence nodded. The cave's ancient drawing still lingered in his mind, especially the one of the lone figure on the ridge with the falcon perched above him. A strange recognition tugged gently at the edges of his thoughts, but he pushed it aside. There would be time to unravel that mystery later. For now, the desert was guiding them forward. The riders moved in a calm, deliberate pace. The storm beneath the dunes had passed, leaving the land unnervingly still. The wind carried only faint whispers now, and the sun cast long illusions across the sand, shapes that shimmered and danced as though alive. Ferris rode ahead for a moment, scanning the horizon. "Sheikh Auda," he called back. "The land is too quiet." Auda nodded. "Yes, quiet is sometimes a gift, and sometimes a warning." Lawrence leaned forward. "You feel it too?" Auda's gaze drifted over the dunes. We are not alone, but whoever follows us does not wish to be seen yet. There was reassurance in Auda's calm tone, but Lawrence couldn't shake the sense that the watchers, the unknown riders who had shadowed them for days, were drawing closer. Not threatening, not attacking, but closing the gap inch by inch. The caravan followed a narrow wadi where the sand deepened into soft valleys. Shadows pooled there, long and cool, offering moments of relief from the relentless sun. It was in one such valley that Lawrence noticed something unusual. Footprints, not many, just one set. Fresh, bare human feet, small, light, not the stride of a soldier, nor the weight of a grown traveler. Auda, Lawrence whispered, pointing downward. Auda studied the prints with a deepened gaze. A child, or someone small in build, unusual this far from tribal ground. Faris frowned. Alone? The falcon dipped low, circling the prints once before rising again. Auda stroked his beard. This is not mistake. Someone wants us to find this. Lawrence followed the direction of the prints. They led toward a small outcrop of stone, nothing remarkable, simply a jagged formation where wind-carved pillars rose like broken teeth. But as they approached, something shifted in the air, a faint tremor, like the echo of distant movement. Lawrence slowed his camel. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Auda's eyes narrowed. "Yes, the desert breathes differently here." They dismounted and approached on foot. The footprints ended abruptly at the edge of a shadowed alcove in the rock. Lawrence stepped inside carefully, eyes adjusting to the cooler dimness. Then he saw it. A small leather pouch, tied neatly, placed deliberately atop a flat stone, not hidden, not concealed, left to be found. Lawrence picked it up. It was surprisingly light. When he untied the cord, 3 items fell gently into his hand. A tiny brass whistle, a folded scrap of parchment with a symbol drawn in charcoal, a falcon, and a single bead of blue glass, smooth and ancient-looking. Ferris leaned forward. A child's charm? Auda shook his head slowly. No, a message. These items belong to the tribes of the northern border. They used them to mark secret routes or warn travelers. Lawrence unfolded the parchment. The falcon symbol was drawn with deliberate strokes, unmistakable in its shape and intent. "What does it mean?" he asked. Auda exhaled. "It means someone is guiding us, someone who does not wish to be seen, someone who knows the desert better than any of us." A soft sound drifted from the entrance of the alcove, a stone shifting or sand sliding under a light footstep. Ferris turned quickly. "Who's there?" Silence answered. But the feeling of presence, distinct, lingering, remained. Lawrence stepped outside, scanning the dunes. For a brief moment he caught sight of a slender figure cresting a distant ridge, small, lithe, robes fluttering like pale wings. Then the figure vanished. A child, a scout, a ghost of the desert? Auda placed a hand on Lawrence's shoulder. "We follow. Whoever leaves these signs means for us to reach something important." Lawrence closed the pouch and tied it to his belt. "Do you trust them?" Auda looked out toward the horizon, where the figure had disappeared. "The desert trusts them. That is enough for now." The falcon rose again, climbing high into the shimmering sky. It circled once, twice, then took a new heading, northeast, toward deeper, harsher lands. Lawrence mounted his camel, the weight of the mysterious gift pressing lightly against his hip. The desert was no longer just guiding them. It was speaking, sending signs, weaving their journey toward an unseen center. And Lawrence felt, deep inside, that the next revelation waited, just beyond the horizon's shimmering veil. The caravan resumed its course, shadows lengthening as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. Though the heat remained strong, a gentler wind pushed across the dunes, carrying with it the faint scent of stone and distant water. The Falcon kept its path ahead, a silent arrow drawn across the sky. But now there was more than the Falcon guiding them. There was the memory of the small figure on the ridge, the strange pouch left in the alcove, the footprints too delicate to belong to any soldier. Someone, some unseen sentinel of the desert, moved ahead of them, leaving signs like breadcrumbs in the sand. Lawrence felt their presence more keenly with every mile. Aura seemed to sense the same. When the desert chooses a guide, it chooses one who can walk its edges unseen, he said quietly. Someone who belongs to the in-between places. The in-between? Lawrence asked. Aura nodded. Not fully tribe, not fully wanderer. One who moves like a shadow, one who knows paths even we cannot trace. Faris shuddered subtly. A spirit, Aura chuckled softly. No, Faris, a spirit does not leave footprints. But Lawrence was not fully convinced. The air around them felt different, charged, expectant, as though the unseen guide walked just beyond the reach of their sight, never too close, never too far. By late afternoon, the dunes gave way to a series of low, jagged hills shaped by centuries of wind. Shadows pooled in the crevices, offering pockets of cool relief. The rocks here were streaked in dark reds and deep browns, like ancient brush strokes across a massive canvas. The Falcon dipped suddenly and soared toward a narrow gap between two boulders. Aura motioned toward it. We go through. They dismounted, leading their camels on foot through the passage. The rock walls rose above them, worn smooth in places and jagged in others, casting the interior in long ribbons of shadow. The air was cooler here, carrying a faint echo of dripping water from somewhere unseen. As they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a hidden hollow, a bowl-shaped valley tucked within the hills. It was sheltered from the wind, its floor soft with fine sand and dotted with small, hardy plants clinging stubbornly to life. But the most striking thing was this. At the center of the hollow lay a single stone pillar, carved by wind and time into a shape that almost resembled a person, tall, slender, hooded by a natural curve of rock. A sentinel, standing watch over the valley. Faris whispered, "It looks alive." Aura bowed his head slightly. "This is Sakra al-Haris, the stone guardian. My father spoke of it. He said the desert carved it to mark a place of refuge." Lawrence approached slowly, drawn by the quiet majesty of the formation. The stone was cool to the touch, worn smooth in some places, rough in others. Sunlight filtered down around it, illuminating the pillar in a halo of warm gold. At its base lay something unexpected, a fresh clay water bowl, unbroken, half full. Lawrence's breath caught. Someone was here, recently. Aura examined the bowl. The water inside was clear, clean, and still cool. "Not more than an hour," he murmured. Faris stepped back, eyes wide. But we saw no one. "The desert hides those it wishes to hide," Aura replied. Lawrence scanned the valley. There were no footprints near the bowl, no signs of disturbance. It was as if the water had simply appeared or been placed there with impossible delicacy. The Falcon perched atop the stone guardian, watching them with unwavering intensity. Its feathers caught the dying light, turning them bronze and gold. Lawrence felt a quiet shiver slip down his spine. Whoever guides us, they move like the wind, Otto nodded, and they want us to drink. The riders took turns sipping from the bowl, offering thanks in soft murmurs. The water was crisp and refreshing, as though drawn from a deep, sheltered spring. It eased the dryness in their throats and cooled the heat inside their chests. As Lawrence drank, he felt something else, a faint tremble beneath the sand, not like the singing dunes earlier, something gentler, more like a heartbeat. He looked to Auda. Did you feel that? The sheikh exhaled slowly. Yes. The desert is warning us that sunset brings movement. We must leave this place before night fully arrives. As they prepared to continue, Lawrence turned once more to the stone guardian. For a brief moment, only a heartbeat, he imagined he saw a small figure standing at its base, half hidden in shadow. Then the wind shifted and the shadow dissolved. But the impression remained. The desert's unseen sentinel was watching, guiding, waiting. The Falcon launched itself from the rock, soaring toward the darkening horizon. Auda mounted his camel. Come, the desert's next lesson waits in the twilight. The riders followed, leaving the hollow behind as dusk began to draw its purple veil across the sky. Dusk unfurled across the desert like a slow-spreading veil of violet and rose. The heat of the day released its grip, and the wind grew cooler, carrying with it the scent of night, dry, ancient, and strangely comforting. The horizon shimmered in soft gradients, the sun a distant ember sinking beneath rolling waves of sand. The riders moved northeastward now, following the Falcon's path as it glided effortlessly toward the fading light. Lawrence felt the familiar serenity of twilight settling into him, loosening the tightness that had gathered in his chest throughout the day. This was the hour when the desert softened, breathing gently before night's deeper mysteries awakened. Auda rode at the front, his posture calm and steady. We travel now across Sal al-Mutaharik, he said quietly. The moving plain. Farah's eyes widened. Is it like the singing dunes? Auda shook his head. No. The plain does not rise or shift itself. It moves through silence. A place where the wind erases all things quickly. Tracks do not stay here. Sound does not travel far. It is easy to be lost. Lawrence glanced at the landscape. It did look different, smoother, softer, with fewer ridges. The sand lay in delicate layers, rippled like the surface of a calm sea after a gentle tide. Is it dangerous? He asked. Auda gave a small, thoughtful nod. Yes, but only for those who walk without purpose. Lawrence felt a warm breeze brush his cheek, carrying a faint stirring of dust. And us? We have purpose, Auda said simply, and a guide. As if to confirm his words, the Falcon circled above them, letting out a soft cry that echoed faintly in the thinning air. Twilight deepened. Stars pricked the sky one by one, forming bright constellations that shimmered above the soft dunes. Shadows lengthened around the riders, stretching long fingers across the desert floor. Then Lawrence noticed something peculiar, their own tracks. The deep impressions left by camels were fading almost instantly. Within minutes, the wind smoothed them into soft swirls, erasing every sign of their passage. Ferris watched with unease. The desert swallows us. No, Auda replied, it protects us. Anyone following will struggle to find our path now. Lawrence looked back over his shoulder. The watchers were somewhere behind them, unseen, patient, persistent. But in this place, where the sand wrote and rewrote itself with every breath of wind, pursuit would become guesswork. Auda whispered to Lawrence, "Tonight the desert hides us, but tomorrow it may reveal what hunts us." The wind grew stronger as night approached, creating a low rustling sound that filled the plain like distant whispers. The sand lifted in gentle veils, swirling around their camels' legs, brushing their robes in soft, rhythmic motions. As the darkness deepened, Lawrence noticed shapes beginning to form near the horizon, faint silhouettes that wavered with the wind. "Look," he murmured. Auda followed his gaze. "Not rocks, not dunes." Ferris stiffened slightly. "What are they?" Lawrence squinted. "Tents?" Auda exhaled slowly. "A camp, but too still for the hour." They approached with caution. The Falcon soared ahead, circling the cluster of shapes before landing on a tall staff planted in the sand. When the riders drew near enough to see clearly, Lawrence's breath caught. It was a camp, 5 tents arranged in a semicircle, but the fires were cold. The ropes hung loose, and the tents themselves fluttered softly in the rising wind, empty and silent as abandoned shells. Ferris whispered, "Another ambush site." Auda scanned the area, his gaze sharp and unsettled. "No, this is something different." Lawrence dismounted and walked slowly between the tents. Everything looked untouched. No struggle, no spilled belongings, no footprints, just perfect silence. Too perfect. Then he noticed the symbols on the interior walls of each tent, drawn lightly with charcoal or ash. A falcon's wings spread wide, the same symbol that had been left for them on the scrap of parchment. Lawrence felt a strange chill slide down his spine despite the warm air. "They were here?" Auda nodded. "Yes, the one who guides us, and perhaps others." "Why leave these marks?" Ferris asked. "So we would know," Auda answered, "that this place is safe, that they passed here not long ago, and that we follow the correct path." Lawrence stepped out of the final tent and looked toward the darkening horizon. The sky above was now deep indigo, punctured by stars. The wind lifted again, swirling sand gently round their feet. Auda approached him. "The moving plain hides their tracks as well as ours. We will not see them, but they are near." Lawrence nodded. "Watching. Always." The Falcon launched into the sky once more, wings outstretched against the growing night. It flew toward the far edge of the plain, where the sands dipped into shadow. Auda gestured for the riders to mount. "We continue. The plain grows colder soon, and we must find high ground before midnight." Lawrence mounted his camel, casting one last look at the silent, symbol-marked camp. Someone was guiding them, someone unseen, someone who knew the desert as if it were a living map. And as they rode deeper into twilight, Lawrence felt the story tightening around them. Threads woven in sand, wind, and shadow. The next truth waited in the night ahead. Night flowed fully over the moving plain, cloaking the dunes in deep indigo and soft silver. The wind had cooled to a gentle sigh, brushing against the riders like a calming hand. Above them stars shimmered with an almost liquid brilliance, bright and sharp in the moonless sky. The desert, bathed in these distant lights, felt endless, an ocean of shifting shadows and faint gleams. The caravan moved with careful rhythm, camels stepping lightly across sand that softened their footfalls. Their breath rose in quiet clouds, disappearing into the darkness. Lawrence felt the cool air settle into his robes, easing the heat of the day. But despite the night's serenity, a tension threaded softly through his chest. Someone was near, not close enough to see, but close enough that the desert itself seemed aware of them. Auda lifted a hand, signaling a slower pace. His eyes swept the horizon, reading the night as one reads familiar script. "Something follows," he murmured. Ferris stiffened. The Watchers? Oda didn't answer directly. Listen. They paused. In the silence, Lawrence heard the faintest sound, so faint he almost thought it was a trick of the wind, a soft, rhythmic shift of sand. Then silence. Then another shift. Not near but not distant either, like someone walking carefully just beyond the edge of vision. Lawrence leaned forward. A scout? Oda shook his head slowly. No single scout moves like this. There are several, but they move lightly, carefully. Ferris whispered. What do they want? To see, Oda replied. To understand us before revealing themselves. The Falcon circled overhead, its silhouette slicing across the starlit sky before disappearing behind a ridge of dunes. A moment later, it let out a sharp cry, the first in hours, a warning. Oda tightened his grip on the reins. We stop here. They guided their camels to a small rise, a gentle hill that offered just enough elevation to watch the plain. The sand here was firmer, held together by traces of salt or ancient clay. The riders knelt their camels and settled quietly. No fire, no lanterns, only the starlight. Oda stood still as a carved statue, eyes scanning the shifting darkness. Lawrence watched him, recognizing the deep listening of a man attuned to every breath of the desert. Minutes passed. The wind stirred softly around them. Then Lawrence saw it. A flicker, a movement, a pale shape cresting the dune far to their left. He narrowed his eyes. There. Oda followed his gaze. Yes, another. A second shape appeared, small, swift, silent, then a third. Lawrence felt his pulse quicken, though the night remained calm. The shapes were slender, wrapped in light robes that blended with the desert. They moved like shadows caught between breaths, barely touching the sand. Oda exhaled softly. The veiled tribe. Ferris looked startled. They are real? Oda nodded. Real, but rarely seen. They live between dunes, between winds, between the known and unknown. They are watchers of the old ways. Lawrence watched in quiet awe as the figures moved with fluid grace, never crossing the ridge fully, never approaching, but always visible enough to know they existed. Will they speak to us? Lawrence whispered. Oda's gaze darkened thoughtfully. Only when they choose. They reveal themselves only to those the desert marks. Lawrence felt a strange warmth at those words, a sense that the desert itself was watching him with unseen eyes. Suddenly, one of the figures stopped, turned, and lifted an arm. In its hand was something small, reflective, a metal shard or perhaps a polished stone. It caught the starlight and flashed once, bright as a falling star. A signal. The other figures paused, then, just as silently as they appeared, they melted back into the dunes. One moment visible, the next swallowed by shifting shadow. Ferris breathed out slowly. Where did they go? Oda gave a faint smile. Where the desert hides them. Lawrence stared at the dune where the last figure had signaled. That flash? Was it meant for us? Yes, Oda said quietly. A sign to follow. They want us to walk their path. Lawrence felt the desert's silent pull, stronger now, clearer. What lies in that direction? He asked. Oda's answer came softly, like a prayer spoken to the sand. The place where secrets wait. A valley only the old tribes know. A place where the desert shows its heart, and where destiny begins to take shape. The Falcon returned, gliding above them before diving toward the dune where the watchers had vanished. Lawrence rose slowly, the night air filling his lungs with cool certainty, whatever awaited them ahead. Whatever unseen truth the watchers intended them to uncover, he felt ready. Auda placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. We ride at dawn. The desert around them exhaled, settling into deep stillness. Above the stars watched, and just beyond the next ridge, footsteps moved in shadows, guiding them toward the next revelation. The night passed quietly, wrapped in a hush so deep it felt like the desert itself was holding its breath. When dawn began to form along the horizon, the first light unfurled in gentle hues of lavender and rose, delicate colors that brushed the dunes with a soft, dreamlike glow. The riders rose slowly, stretching limbs stiff from rest. Camels shifted and murmured, shaking the cool sand from their coats. Auda watched the horizon with a steady, contemplative expression, his silhouette touched by the first blush of morning. "The watchers wait for us," he murmured. Lawrence felt the truth of that settle inside him, clear as the pale light. The night's silent sentinels, the veiled figures in the dunes, had marked a direction, a path, a sign. Today they would follow it. The Falcon appeared just as the sun crested the edge of the world, its wings turning gold in the new light. It let out a sharp, decisive cry and soared toward the ridge where the figures had vanished hours earlier. Auda mounted. "We go." The caravan moved with quiet purpose, climbing the sloping dune until the desert opened wide before them, in a breathtaking sweep of long shadows and soft morning radiance. The wind carried a new scent, mineral-rich, cool, tinged with the memory of hidden water. Lawrence inhaled deeply. "The air is different here," Auda nodded. "Yes, we approach Wadi al-Hijab, the Valley of Veils." Ferris turned in his saddle. "Veils?" Auda explained as they descended the far side of the dune. "Because it reveals and hides in the same breath, a place where old tribes crossed paths, where secrets were exchanged instead of weapons. Only those welcomed by the desert may enter." The Falcon guided them toward a narrow opening between two towering stone cliffs. Their surfaces shimmered like copper in the morning sun. The entrance appeared small at first, but as they drew nearer, the cliffs widened to reveal a vast passageway. The moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. Cool, still, thick with quiet. The walls rose steeply, carved by centuries of wind into smooth, flowing arcs. Thin beams of sunlight slipped in from cracks above, illuminating drifting motes of dust that sparkled as they fell. The air smelled faintly of old earth, stone, and something mysterious like forgotten gardens. Ferris whispered, "It feels like walking into another world." Auda smiled. "In many ways, it is." The passage carried them deeper until the walls opened suddenly into a broad valley hidden entirely from the outside desert. Lawrence's breath caught. It was beautiful. A vast basin surrounded by steep cliffs, the floor dotted with clusters of hardy shrubs and low plants. The sand here was pale, almost white, and in the center lay a pool of water so still it appeared like a mirror reflecting the sky. And the wind, soft, melodic, passed through certain rock formations, creating tones that hummed faintly, rising and falling like distant music. But what struck Lawrence most was this. There were footprints, dozens of them, light, delicate, recent. Auda dismounted and knelt to study the prints. The veiled tribe was here at dawn. Ferris scanned the cliffs. "Are they hiding?" Auda's eyes softened. "They are watching." Lawrence felt their presence, unseen yet unmistakable. A faint pressure, a quiet tug at the edges of awareness. No threat, only observation. Then, from the far side of the valley, a single figure stepped into view, small, light-footed, robed in pale cloth that fluttered softly in the morning breeze. The same figure from the ridge, the one whose footprints they had followed. The figure stood motionless, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something in the air. The sunlight illuminated the veil covering their face, revealing only a pair of dark, alert eyes. Auda placed a calming hand on Lawrence's arm. "Do not move quickly. It is a great honor to be approached." The figure took a slow step forward, then another. Their movements were graceful, almost weightless, like drifting sand carried by a calm wind. The falcon descended and perched near them on a low rock, as if the bird belonged to them, or they to the bird. Lawrence felt his breath steady, his heartbeat slow. The figure stopped a few paces away. A small hand emerged from beneath their robe, holding something familiar, the blue glass bead, the same bead from the pouch they had found. The figure extended the hand, offering it silently, reverently. Auda bowed his head. "They acknowledge us." Lawrence reached out slowly, accepting the bead into his palm. It felt warm, though the morning air was cool. The figure spoke then, softly, in a voice that echoed faintly against the valley walls. The words were Arabic, but ancient, melodic, carrying an accent Lawrence had never heard. Auda translated quietly. "They say you walk the right path, but the danger you follow is not the danger ahead." Lawrence felt the words settle over him like a cloak. "Ask them what awaits us." Before Auda could speak, the figure raised a hand and pointed toward the northeast, beyond the valley, beyond the cliffs, toward a land still hidden from sight. Then the figure stepped back, and another figure appeared beside them, then another, and another, until a dozen stood along the cliff's edge, veiled, silent, watching. Auda bowed deeply. The figures vanished one by one into the rising light, leaving only the whisper of wind and the falcon's soft cry. Lawrence closed his hand around the bead. The path ahead had changed. The watchers no longer felt like threats. They were guides, protectors of something ancient, something waiting. Auda placed a steady hand on his camel's reins. "We leave the Valley of Veils, and now, Lawrence, we go where very few have gone." Lawrence looked toward the northeast, where the unknown shimmered like a promise. He felt ready. The caravan left the Valley of Veils in silence, a respectful, almost reverent quiet, as though each rider understood they were stepping away from sacred ground. The cliffs behind them caught the morning sun and glowed like ancient bronze, their shadows stretching across the pale sand like fingers reluctant to let the travelers go. The falcon, ever faithful, soared ahead, leading them toward the northeast. But something felt different now, not ominous, but heavier. The valley's gift, the bead, the symbols, the appearance of the veiled tribe, had shifted the desert's tone. The path ahead no longer felt merely like a journey, it felt like a summons. Auda rode beside Lawrence, his posture straight, his expression contemplative. "The watchers showed themselves to us directly. This is rare." Lawrence nodded softly. "Why now?" "Because the danger behind us grows," Auda answered, "and the danger ahead waits for us to be ready." Ferris rode up from behind, eyes alert. "Do you think the watchers know what we seek?" Auda considered this carefully. They know more than they ever say. They see paths hidden from others. Lawrence turned the blue glass bead over in his palm. Its smooth surface glimmered in the sunlight, warm to the touch, as though containing its own quiet heartbeat. "A message," Lawrence murmured. "But what message?" Before Auda could answer, The wind shifted sharply. A cool gust swept across the dunes, carrying with it the faintest sound, soft, rhythmic, like distant pounding. Footsteps, hooves, drums. Ferris tensed. Shake. Do you hear that? Otter raised a hand, signaling the caravan to halt. The riders quieted instantly, their camels kneeling in the sand. Lawrence held his breath. The sound grew clearer. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not wind, not echo, not illusion. Something moving across the desert floor from a distance. Otter dismounted and pressed his ear to the ground. After a moment he stood slowly, his expression grave. Riders, he said. Many. Ferris stiffened. Turks? Likely? Lawrence scanned the horizon. The dunes shimmered, their edges blurring in the still rising heat. But far to the southwest, barely visible atop a distant ridge, he saw dark specks moving, not scattered like nomadic travelers, organized, aligned, marching, a patrol or something more. Lawrence felt his pulse steady, his voice low but calm. They're following our path. Otta nodded. And they are closer than before. But how? Ferris asked. The moving plane erased our tracks. Lawrence's breath caught. Unless, Otta finished the thought, unless they have someone guiding them too. The idea settled heavily among them. If the Turks had a guide, someone who knew the desert, who could read its whispers, then the gap between pursuer and pursued could close quickly. The valley had hidden them for a time, but the open desert offered little protection now. Otta placed a firm hand on Lawrence's shoulder. We must move quickly, El Lawrence. If they seek to cut us off, they will aim for the narrow passes ahead. Lawrence nodded. Then we reach them first? The Falcon circled above, letting out a sharp cry, a warning, urgent and piercing. Ferris pointed toward the northeast. There! Movement! Lawrence followed his gaze. A figure stood briefly atop a dune, small, veiled, unmistakable. The Watchers. One raised an arm and swept it swiftly from east to north, an unmistakable gesture. A direction, a command, a warning. Otta didn't hesitate. They want us to turn north immediately. But north leads into the stony lands, Ferris said. Hard ground, difficult for camels. Otta mounted swiftly. Better stones beneath our feet than soldiers at our backs. Lawrence climbed onto his camel and took one last glance southward. The distant swarm of riders had grown clearer. Sunlight flashed off metal, rifles, sabers, perhaps helmets. They were coming, hard and fast. The Watcher's figure remained on the dune until the caravan shifted course. Then, like a mirage dissolving, they vanished into the sand. Lawrence tightened his grip on the reins. The desert was no longer testing them. It was urging them onward, pushing them away from the jaws closing behind. Otta spoke in a low, steady voice. Hold tight. The land ahead is harsher, but it hides secrets only the brave may seek. The wind rose behind them, carrying the distant thunder of hooves. The caravan moved, northward, toward unknown stone, shadow, and what the Watchers had chosen for them next. The desert changed gradually at first, subtle hints that the land was shifting its character. The dunes grew smaller, flatter, their once sweeping forms giving way to patches where stone pierced through the sand. The color of the earth darkened from pale gold to muted amber, then to the soft gray of weathered rock. The wind, too, took on a new voice. No longer the smooth whisper of sand sliding over sand. Here it carried a faint, hollow hum, brushing across the stones like a quiet breath through ancient corridors. Otta led the caravan with steady urgency. The Falcon circled above, its wings cutting sharp arcs in the sky. Behind them, the distant thunder of the pursuing riders persisted like a steady heartbeat, too far to threaten yet, but too close to ignore. Faris looked over his shoulder. They are gaining, Otto shook his head. Not yet, but they have found harder ground. Sound travels far here. Lawrence listened. The thud of hooves echoed faintly, bouncing off the emerging stone ridges. The landscape magnified every sound, turning whispers of movement into distant warnings. Ahead, the dunes dipped away entirely, replaced by a broad field of scattered rocks, some smooth as river stones, others jagged like broken spears. Camels tread carefully, their feet adjusting to the unfamiliar terrain. Lawrence felt the air grow cooler. It feels different here, Outer nodded. This is Ard al-Hajar, the land of stone, a place older than the dunes we left behind. Faris scanned the horizon uneasily. And more dangerous? Different dangers, Outer replied. The sand hides enemies. Stone reveals them. But the stony ground also revealed something else, a path. Thin, nearly invisible at first, a trail wound between tall rock formations, not carved by tools, not marked by human hands, worn smooth by centuries of wind, as if the desert itself had shaped a road. Otto's eyes narrowed as he studied it. This is no ordinary path. Few know of it. Lawrence felt a quiet thrill. The Watchers? Perhaps, Otto murmured. Perhaps they walk this way when they do not wish to be found. The Falcon dipped low, almost touching the stones, and soared directly along the path. Otto smiled faintly. We follow. As they moved deeper into the stony expanse, the world around them changed further. Tall pillars of rock rose like silent guardians, their surfaces worn into curves and hollows by ancient winds. Shadows pooled beneath them, cool, soft, shifting gently with the rising sun. Faris dismounted briefly to examine a rock face. Look, he said softly, pointing. Lawrence joined him. Etched faintly into the stone were marks, symbols, carved with delicate precision, faded, nearly erased by time, but unmistakable. A falcon. A curved line like a wind path. A series of dots forming an arrow pointed north. Lawrence touched the carvings gently. They were here. Oda nodded. Long ago, or recently, with the Watchers one cannot always tell. As they continued along the path, the sound of the pursuing riders shifted again, fainter now, more distant. The stony ground distorted echoes, confusing direction. Auda smiled. Good, the stones mislead them. They will lose our trail here. Lawrence felt relief settle into his shoulders like a soft weight. The Watchers had guided them true. Then, as the caravan rounded a massive boulder, Lawrence froze. Ahead lay an expanse unlike anything he had ever seen, a long valley cut deeply between towering stone walls, its floor paved not with sand, but with smooth, dark slabs, natural rock polished over millennia. Light filtered in from above, shimmering off the surfaces with an otherworldly glow. Faris whispered, awestruck, "It looks like a road." Otto nodded. It is said the ancient caravans used this place, a secret way through the stone lands. Lawrence gazed at the shimmering path. But why is it so polished? Otto's voice dropped. Because something always moved through here. Wind, water, or other things. A silence settled over them, not ominous, not threatening, but deep, resonant, alive. The Falcon landed on a high ledge, as if claiming the path as its domain. Lawrence stepped forward, his boots tapping softly on the smooth stone. The sound echoed gently, like faint bells drifting on the wind. Otto approached him. We camp near this valley. It is sheltered, and tomorrow we follow it deeper, The watchers wish for us to see something. Lawrence turned, the weight of the moment settling over him like a cloak. What do you think lies ahead? Auda looked toward the far end of the valley where shadows deepened into shimmering darkness. A truth, he said softly, one hidden even from the Turks, one the desert kept safe until the right moment. The wind brushed past them, carrying a faint, distant sound, like a whispering chorus rising from the stones. Lawrence inhaled slowly, feeling the valley's ancient breath fill him. The desert had led them here for a reason, and the reason waited in the depths of the stone. Morning returned with a gentle glow, filtering softly into the stone-paved valley, as though poured from a silver bowl. Shadows retreated slowly from the smooth rock, revealing the full majesty of the passage, its polished surface gleaming like an ancient mirror, its walls rising in silent grandeur high above. The desert had become stone, and the stone somehow felt alive. Lawrence stepped forward as the caravan prepared to move, his boots making soft, ringing taps against the smooth floor. The sound echoed faintly, once, twice, before dissolving into the valley's vast quiet. Auda joined him, guiding his camel carefully. "This place," he murmured, "is older than memory." Ferris looked around with wide eyes. "Do you hear it? Like breathing." Lawrence paused and listened. At first he heard nothing, only the faint sigh of the morning wind brushing along the stone. But then, beneath that, something deeper, subtle, rhythmic, like air moving through a cavern. Not sound exactly. A vibration, a pulse. He exhaled slowly. Yes, it's faint, but it's there. Auda smiled faintly. The valley is alive in its way, though the old tribe said the stone remembers what sand forgets. The riders moved forward. The Falcon glided ahead, its wings stretched wide as it passed between the towering walls. The valley narrowed here and there, opening again into wide chambers where rock formations twisted upward like frozen waves. Light played across the stone in soft patterns, casting delicate ripples that shimmered like water. Lawrence felt the calm of it settle into him, as though the land itself urged them to move slowly, respectfully. Yet beneath the calm, something stirred. Subtle at first, shifts of sound, slight changes in the temperature of the stones beneath their feet. The valley didn't feel threatening, but it felt aware, as though it recognized their presence and was waiting. Auda slowed his camel. "We must walk from here. The land grows narrow." They dismounted and led the camels by hand. The stone floor sloped downward, curving gently before leveling out again. With each step, the sensation of breathing stone grew stronger. Faris shivered lightly. Shake. What made this valley? Wind alone cannot shape stone like this. Auda ran his fingers along a smooth wall. No one knows. Some say it was carved by water in ages long forgotten. Others say the desert spirits swept through with their breath. And some, he glanced at Lawrence with a small, mysterious smile. Some believe ancient tribes shaped it with tools lost to time. Lawrence touched the wall. It was cool, cooler than the morning air, and strangely smooth like the inside of a polished bowl. "What does the valley lead to?" he asked. Auda paused before answering. "If the Watchers are guiding us, then it leads to knowledge, or danger, or both." The path widened again, opening into a great chamber where pillars of stone rose like colossal trees. Thin shafts of sunlight entered from far above, illuminating drifting particles of dust that sparkled like falling stars. And there, at the chamber's center, They found the first sign, a mark on the stone floor, painted in dark pigment. A falcon, wings spread wide. Ferris gasped softly. They were here. Auda crouched beside the mark, examining it closely. Fresh, made within the last day. Lawrence felt a chill, not of fear, but of awe. The Watchers brought us here on purpose. Auda nodded. Yes, and they want us to continue. They walked deeper into the chamber. The air grew cooler, the breath of the valley more pronounced. Lawrence felt it in his bones, a slow, steady pulse that matched the rhythm of his own breathing. Then he noticed it, a narrow crack at the far end of the chamber, tall, thin, framed by two massive pillars, dark within, yet glowing faintly around the edges with reflected light. The falcon flew through it. Auda's eyes widened slightly. This is no ordinary passage, Lawrence approached cautiously. As he stepped closer, a faint sound emerged from the darkness beyond, soft, distant, like wind moving across hollow reeds. Faris whispered, "It sounds like the singing dunes, but stone." Auda nodded. "Yes, this is why it is called the Valley That Breathes." Lawrence touched the edge of the passage. The stone was warm, warmer than the air, warmer than the surrounding rock. Alive. Auda stepped beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "From this point, Lawrence, we walk into a place few living men have seen. What lies beyond may not be for all eyes." Lawrence breathed deeply, letting the valley's faint humming settle into him. "What lies beyond?" he asked softly. Auda's voice carried both reverence and warning, a forgotten truth, a crossroads of old paths, and perhaps the reason the Watchers follow you. Lawrence felt the words flow through him like a cold river. The falcon called once, a sharp echoing cry, vanishing into the narrow passage. Auda turned to the riders. "We go forward, together." They stepped into the shadowed opening. The stone around them hummed softly, almost like a welcome, and the valley exhaled as though revealing the beginning of its deepest secret. The narrow passage swallowed them in cool shadow, the air shifting from the warm breath of morning into something deeper, older. Lawrence felt the change instantly. The stone walls seemed to close in, never threatening but intimate, as if the valley wished to speak in a voice too quiet for the open desert. Their footsteps echoed softly, slow, rhythmic taps against the polished stone, each step answered by a faint musical resonance, like distant chimes hidden in the rock. Ferris whispered, barely audible, "It's singing again, but differently." Auda nodded. The valley changes its voice depending on who walks it. Lawrence wasn't sure what that meant, but he felt something shifting in the air, an anticipation, a gathering stillness, as though the stone passage were leading them toward a truth it had guarded for centuries. The falcon darted ahead, disappearing briefly into darkness, before reappearing as a silhouette in a shaft of light at the passage's end. The riders stepped into a vast cavern. Lawrence stopped in awe. This was no natural hollow. The chamber was enormous, its ceiling disappearing into shadow, its walls carved with patterns too precise to be accidental. Intricate spirals, sweeping lines, clustered symbols, and stylized birds, falcons again, etched deeply into the stone. Sunlight streamed through high crevices in narrow golden beams, illuminating swirling dust in the air like suspended stars. But there was more. Far along the chamber's farthest wall, a raised stone platform had been carved into the rock itself, a dais shaped like a half-moon. At its center lay an object covered by a thin layer of sand. Auda approached slowly, reverently. this place?" His voice softened to a near whisper. "My father spoke of it only once, a sacred hall, a place where leaders of old tribes came to seek guidance from the desert." Ferris's eyes widened. "But no one has been here for centuries." Otto nodded. "Yes, the desert hid it, and the Watchers have revealed it." Lawrence stepped onto the smooth floor of the chamber, his boots sending soft echoes that rippled through the enormous space. Something about this place felt alive, not in a physical sense, but in essence, as if the walls themselves breathed, listened, remembered. He approached the dais. The sand covering the object was thin, almost like dust. When he brushed it away gently with his fingers, a metal surface glimmered beneath. Lawrence froze. It was a brass plate, engraved with markings similar to those on the cave paintings. A falcon in mid-flight, lines radiating outward, circles and arrows denoting directions. A map. Otto inhaled sharply. "This is no ordinary map." Lawrence turned it over carefully. The backside was etched with words, in ancient Arabic script, worn but legible. The letters shimmered faintly in the golden light. Otto read aloud in a low, reverent tone. "He who walks with a falcon walks between worlds. Where the sands meet stone, there shall the truth be revealed. Beyond the breath of the valley lies the heart of the desert's war." Ferris swallowed. "The desert's war?" Otto nodded slowly. "A conflict older than the Turks, older than the tribes, a struggle for land, for water, for power, for survival." Lawrence studied the symbols. "This map? It doesn't show borders or cities. It shows pathways, alliances, movements of tribes." Otto pointed at one arc. "This line represents the old caravan road, the one we walked. Another line, a second road, crossing the first. Large symbol resembling a sun, its rays reaching outward." Lawrence traced it with his finger. "This is where the paths converge." Otto's expression grew grave. "An oasis, or a fortress, or something powerful enough that all paths lead to it." Ferris hesitated. "But why now? Why reveal it to us?" Lawrence lifted the map, feeling its weight. "Because the Watchers want us to know what the Turks seek." Otto nodded, his eyes narrowing. "If the Turks find this place first, the entire rebellion could be crushed." The chamber's echo deepened, as if the stone itself agreed. Lawrence felt a slow, heavy certainty settle inside him. Their journey was no longer about survival. It was about realizing a destiny older than all of them. Then, from deep within the chamber, a soft sound rose. Not stone shifting, not wind, but footsteps. Light, measured, more than one pair. Ferris gripped his reins. "Shake!" Otto raised a calming hand. "Wait!" From the far shadows, figures emerged. Not soldiers, not enemies. The Watchers, veiled, silent, moving with the same weightless grace as before. They formed a half circle around Lawrence and Otto, their eyes reflecting the golden light. One stepped forward, the very same small figure who had given Lawrence the bead. The figure raised an arm slowly and placed a hand over their heart, a sign of trust, a sign of alliance. Otto bowed deeply. "We receive your guidance." The veiled figure extended a hand toward the map. Lawrence understood. They were not just showing him the path, they were asking him to take it, to carry the map, to fulfill something larger than any single mission, to walk the line between worlds. The falcon let out a sharp cry from above, its voice ringing through the chamber like the call of destiny itself. Lawrence looked down at the map, then back at the Watchers. "Show us," he whispered. Show us what comes next." And the chamber answered with a soft, rising hum as the stone breathed deeper and the watchers stepped forward to reveal the next piece of the desert's secret war. The hum within the chamber of echoes deepened, vibrating through the polished floor and rising into the still air like the distant toll of a hidden bell. The watchers stood before Lawrence and Auda, silent and unmoving, their veils fluttering slightly, as if stirred by an unseen breeze. The Falcon perched on a high ledge above them, its silhouette framed by a shaft of golden light. Lawrence held the ancient brass map in both hands. It felt heavier than before, not because of its metal weight, but because of the destiny pressed into it. The watcher's presence amplified that weight, turning the air into something charged, expectant. The smallest watcher stepped forward again, the one whose footprints had first guided them, whose bead now rested in Lawrence's pocket. The figure slowly extended a hand toward the map. Lawrence hesitated only for a moment, then offered it. The figure's slender fingers traced the central symbol, the radiating sun-like emblem where the converging paths met. The figure pressed gently upon it, and to Lawrence's astonishment, the map shifted. A thin inner plate rotated beneath the surface, realigning lines and symbols until a new shape emerged. Auda inhaled sharply. A hidden layer. Lawrence leaned closer. The new pattern revealed a deeper truth, one that had been concealed beneath the first. Not a sun, not an oasis, but a fortress, symbolized by a thick ring surrounded by 4 marks resembling watchtowers. The watchers stepped aside, revealing more of the chamber's wall carvings. One drawing, barely visible beneath layers of sand and time, showed a massive structure rising from the desert. High walls, a central tower, channels of water flowing beneath it, a stronghold of impossible construction for such ancient times. Auda's voice was hushed, reverent. Qasr al-Najm, the fortress of the star. Forrest blinked. A legend, a story told to children. Auda shook his head. Legends often hide truths. The watchers traced another line on the map, one leading directly from the valley to the fortress symbol. Then the small figure lifted its arm and pointed toward the northeast passage of the chamber. The message needed no translation. "Follow this path." Lawrence's breath steadied. "This is where the Turks are heading." Auda nodded gravely. "If they reach it first, they will control the water routes and trade paths stretching across half of Arabia. Our uprising would wither before it begins." Ferris exhaled. "Then we must reach it before they do." The watchers stepped backward in unison, forming a silent corridor to guide the riders toward the next passage. Their movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, as though they belonged to the valley's breath and not to flesh and bone. As Lawrence passed them, the smallest watcher reached out and lightly touched his arm, just a feather's brush. A soft whisper escaped the veil, the first voice Lawrence had heard from any of them. "Serb al-Ri," Auda translated quietly. "The path of the wind," Lawrence nodded. "We'll take it." The watchers bowed their heads briefly, acknowledging a choice made, a destiny accepted. Then, as silently as they had come, they faded back into the chamber's shadows, becoming indistinguishable from the carved stone. Auda turned toward the passage. "Lawrence, this will not be an easy road." Lawrence smiled faintly. "Nothing worth reaching ever is." They mounted their camels once more, the chamber echoing softly with their movements. As they began their ascent toward the narrow tunnel the watchers had indicated, The Falcon launched into the air, gliding ahead with wings outstretched. Auda looked once more at the chamber behind them. "Remember this place," he said. "It has shown us what few have seen." Lawrence glanced back. The last beam of sunlight touched the engraved wall, illuminating the fortress, drawing for one brief moment, like a promise made across time. Then the light faded, and the chamber of echoes fell silent once more. Lawrence turned toward the darkness ahead. The path of the wind awaited, the fortress of the star awaited, and the desert, old and watchful, seemed to whisper, "Go!" The passage leading out of the chamber of echoes narrowed quickly, sloping upward in a winding ascent. The air inside it grew cooler, touched by thin strands of drifting sand that whispered across the stone like quiet voices urging them onward. The Falcon glided ahead, its wings brushing the confined space with soft, steady rhythms. Lawrence placed a hand along the wall as he walked. The stone pulsed faintly, just enough to feel, not enough to unsettle. It was as if the valley itself still breathed around them, guiding them along this newly revealed trail. Auda walked beside him, leading his camel gently by the reins. "This path is older than the tribes," he murmured, "and older than the empire that seeks to claim it." "The path of the wind," Lawrence whispered. "What does the name mean?" Auda smiled faintly. "It means it changes shape. It moves. Only those guided by the desert, or by fate, can find it." Ferris swallowed hard. "And the Turks? Could they find this path?" Auda shook his head. "Not unless a guide shows them, and no guide with honor would lead them here." Lawrence felt relief coiled gently in his chest. The watchers had placed them on a road that could not easily be followed. But he also felt something deeper growing inside him, an awareness that the map now hidden beneath his robe was more than a tool. It was a key, a summons, a responsibility. As the passage widened again, the riders mounted their camels. A cool wind swept through the opening ahead, carrying the scent of open desert, and something else, something faintly sweet, like distant vegetation. When they emerged from the tunnel, Lawrence drew a slow breath. Before them stretched a vast plateau, a high wind-swept expanse where sand mingled with stone in a landscape unlike any they had crossed. The wind here was constant and playful, weaving ripples across the surface and sending streams of fine sand drifting off the plateau's edge like falling water. Auda lifted a hand, narrowing his eyes. "This is the Serb al-Ri, the path of the wind." A natural causeway ran along the plateau, carved not by human hands but by centuries of wind. It wound through towering stone formations, sculpted into strange shapes, arches, tall blades of rock, and slabs balanced precariously atop narrow pillars. The Falcon soared along the path, its shadow crossing the ground like a guiding line. Lawrence gazed across the plateau. "It looks like a world made of wind." "That is exactly what it is," Auda said. "The wind shapes everything here, even the ground beneath our feet." Ferris pointed toward a narrow stone arch. "And that? Is it safe?" Auda nodded. "Safe enough. The wind has carved it for thousands of years. It will hold for one more day." As they rode further, the wind strengthened. It was not harsh. It flowed smoothly, enveloping them in a cool embrace. The sound of it sang around stone pillars and through narrow crevices, creating low, haunting tones that rose and fell like the desert's own music. At times it felt like they were gliding along the path rather than walking. Lawrence inhaled deeply, letting the wind fill him with clarity. The world behind them, the valleys, dunes, and distant threat of pursuing riders, seemed to fade. Here, on the path of the wind, time stretched and slowed. But not all signs brought ease. Halfway along the plateau, Otto halted abruptly. "Look," he whispered. Lawrence followed his gaze and saw faint marks on the stone, scratches, subtle gouges, almost invisible unless the light struck them just right. Claw marks. 2 long, parallel lines. Ferris frowned. What made those? Oda studied them, his expression darkening. These marks are old, but not ancient. A few months, perhaps. Something passed through here. Something? Faris echoed. Oda nodded. There are creatures of the desert that walk only the high places. Rare. Dangerous, if threatened. But they avoid the watchers. Lawrence felt a chill stroke the back of his neck. Whatever made those marks was not something he wished to meet in the narrow passage. The Falcon screeched overhead, once sharp and insistent. Oda mounted again. We must move. The wind protects us on the open plateau, but not if we linger. They resumed their journey. As the sun drifted toward late afternoon, shadows stretched long across the plateau, forming patterns that danced with the shifting wind. The ground dipped, revealing a natural stone bridge leading to the far side of the highlands. Lawrence looked out across the vast horizon, and there, faint but unmistakable, stood the silhouette of something massive far to the north, a tower or a fortress, partially hidden by distance and shimmering heat. Oda followed Lawrence's gaze. Yes, you see it? Lawrence nodded slowly. The fortress of the star? Oda's voice softened. Perhaps, or its outskirts. The desert reveals it only to those it chooses. The Falcon circled above the distant shape, calling into the vast, echoing air. The wind carried the sound like an omen. Lawrence tightened his grip on the reins. Something great stirred on the horizon, a place of power, of danger, of destiny. And the desert had chosen them to reach it. The light softened across the plateau as the afternoon waned, turning the world into layers of amber and rose. The stone beneath the caravan warmed and cooled in slow pulses, as though the path of the wind breathed with the tempo of the dying day. Ahead, the stone bridge stretched like a narrow spine across a deep ravine, elegant, ancient, shaped by wind and time into a perfect arc. Beyond it, the horizon glimmered with the outline of the distant fortress, faint, mysterious, half swallowed by shimmering heat. But something else stirred as they approached the bridge, a subtle heaviness, a shift in the air, the weight of being watched, not by the veiled tribe this time, nor by desert spirits, but by something far more immediate. Oda raised a hand for silence. Ferris froze, his camel lowering its head and snorting uneasily. Lawrence felt it too, a pressure, faint as a whisper, yet unmistakable, a sense that the plateau had narrowed around them. And then he heard it, a distant echo of hooves, faint, rhythmic, carried on the wind like a warning. He turned slowly and saw, far behind them, a ripple of movement along the plateau's edge. The Turks. Oda's jaw tightened. They have found their way through the stone lands. But how? Ferris whispered. Lawrence felt the truth settling like cold iron. They have a guide. The idea had become suspicion, and now suspicion had become certainty. Someone had led the pursuing riders through the untraceable dunes, across the shifting plateau, and now toward the path of the wind. Oda scanned the distance. The figures were small, scattered on horseback, but coordinated. A dozen riders, then more, a long column stretching across the high ground. They move fast, Lawrence murmured. Ferris swallowed. Will they reach us? Otto shook his head slightly. Not if we cross the bridge before they close the gap. The path narrows here, one group at a time. The falcon screeched above them, circling urgently. Otto didn't waste a moment. Move across the bridge, quickly! The riders urged their camels forward. The stone bridge, though narrow, was sturdy. The wind swept beneath it, creating a low current song that rose and fell as they passed over. Lawrence crossed first, the height dizzying beneath him. The ravine dropped sharply on either side, smooth stone walls plunging into shadow. A gust of wind pressed against his robes, cool and steady. The falcon glided above the drop, a silent guardian guiding them on. One by one, the riders crossed. Then the first echo of rifle fire cracked the air. Ferris flinched. They're close enough to shoot. The shot was distant, not aimed, but meant to warn or intimidate. Otto crossed the bridge halfway before stopping abruptly. "Lawrence!" Lawrence looked back. Otto pointed at the ravine wall on the far side. "Do you see that?" Lawrence squinted, and his heart gave a small jolt. Carved into the stone wall beyond the bridge were more symbols, fresh ones. The falcon, a downward arrow, 3 curved lines shaped like waves. The watchers had passed here. They had left instructions. "What does it mean?" Lawrence asked. Otto's eyes sharpened. "That we must descend into the ravine, not continue across the plateau." Ferris's eyes widened. Descend? On what trail? Otto pointed to a narrow ledge partially hidden by shadows. There, a path that winds down the ravine wall. Old, crumbling, but real. Lawrence studied it. The ledge was barely wider than their feet. A slip would mean falling into the abyss below. But the symbols left no doubt. The safe passage was downward, not forward. The Turks would expect them to continue along the plateau. The watchers instructed otherwise. Auda made the decision with a sharp nod. "We follow the watchers, down into the ravine. Quickly!" Another rifle shot cracked the air. Closer this time, the plateau trembled with the thunder of approaching hooves. Auda moved first, guiding his camel with practiced ease towards the narrow path. "Take it slow. Trust the animal. The camels can walk where men cannot." Lawrence followed, his heart thudding as his camel's feet found the first steps of the worn stone path. The world tilted. Wind rushed upward. The falcon flew just ahead, tracing the ledge's curve with smooth precision. The descent was terrifying, each step a test of balance and trust. Stone fragments crumbled underfoot, falling silently into the depths. Behind them, Ferris exhaled shakily. "I can't look down." "Then don't," Lawrence replied softly. "Look forward, one breath at a time." Shouts echoed from the plateau above. The Turks had reached the bridge, their frustration carried in a harsh Arabic curses and the clatter of hooves. Auda didn't look back. "They'll search the ridge. They won't find us. The ravine hides all but the wind." As they descended deeper, the stone walls rose around them, steep and sheltering. The wind grew still, the air cooler. For a moment, just a moment, the sounds of pursuit faded entirely. Then they heard it, a hollow tone, soft, ringing from somewhere deep in the ravine. Faris whispered, "What is that?" Lawrence felt it vibrate through him. "A call." Auda nodded. "The watchers, they wait below." The narrow ledge widened into a hidden shelf of stone. A shadowed hollow stretched before them, a place invisible from the plateau above. The falcon landed at the entrance, and from the darkness, 2 veiled figures stepped forward. Auda bowed deeply. "They have saved us." Lawrence inhaled the cool air. "And they have something more to show us." The watchers motioned silently for them to follow into the shadowed hollow. The Turks thundered above, unaware. The desert had shifted the battlefield. The ravine held the next revelation. The hollow beneath the stone shelf breathed cool air, a gentle exhale from the hidden heart of the ravine. As Lawrence stepped inside, his eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness. The narrow entrance widened into a sheltered cavern, natural, yet shaped by time and wind into a space that felt deliberate, purposeful. The rock walls curved inward like protective arms. Soft light filtered through hairline cracks in the ceiling, forming thin beams that shimmered like falling dust motes suspended in honeyed air. Oda followed close behind, Faris just at his heels. The camels entered without hesitation, as if they recognized the place and its safety. Outside, the shouts of the Turks echoed along the ravine walls, distant, frustrated, directionless. They had lost the trail. The two watchers in the cavern stood silently, veils shifting slightly with the subtle draft. Their presence carried no threat, only an unspoken insistence that the caravan had come exactly where it needed to be. Lawrence stepped forward, the echo of his footfalls gentle and muted. "This place," he whispered. "It's like a sanctuary." Oda nodded. "A hidden refuge. Few know of it. Fewer still are welcomed." Ferris glanced upward nervously. "Do they expect us to hide here?" One watcher extended an arm, pointing deeper into the cavern, toward a narrow corridor half veiled in darkness. A quiet invitation. Lawrence tightened the strap of the map beneath his robe and took a steadying breath. "They want us to follow." Oda touched his arm briefly, grounding him. "Then we follow." They led their camels deeper, the floor turning from rough stone to a smooth, polished path. The air cooled further, carrying a faint scent, mineral, earthy, and something else, something like rain. Lawrence paused. "Water?" Oda's eyes sharpened. "Yes, there is water here." Around the next bend, the cavern opened into a chamber, even larger than the first, and at its center lay a pool, clear, still, glowing faintly from sunlight passing through cracks above. The water mirrored the ceiling with perfect stillness, like a piece of sky trapped beneath the earth. Ferris exhaled in awe. A spring? This deep in stone? Oda knelt at the pool's edge. "A gift," he murmured, "a guarded one." Lawrence crouched beside him and dipped his fingers in. The water was cool, shockingly cool, clean, pure. It tasted of earth and age and renewal. The watchers approached at last. For the first time, one came close enough that Lawrence could see the faint outline of features behind the veil, youthful, delicate, yet wise with a depth that seemed beyond years. The figure extended a hand toward the water, then toward the map hidden beneath Lawrence's robe. Oda translated the silent gesture. "It says, 'Drink, strengthen yourselves, for the journey grows harder from here. The fortress lies close, but so does danger.'" Lawrence nodded gratefully. The riders led their camels to the water. The animals drank deeply. Ferris washed dust from his face, his eyes softening with relief. Oda closed his eyes and took a long breath, letting the cold water settle into his bones. Lawrence drank again, feeling clarity spread through him like fire turning into light. Then the smallest watcher, the same one who had guided them since the dunes, stepped forward. From beneath the robe, the figure produced a small object wrapped in cloth. They held it out to Lawrence, gently, reverently. Lawrence unwrapped it. Inside lay a small carved falcon made of dark stone, smooth, heavy, its wings folded elegantly. Along its underside were etched lines and symbols matching those on the ancient map. A key. Auda inhaled sharply. This belongs to the fortress. Ferris's eyes widened. A way to enter it. The watcher nodded. Lawrence felt his pulse steady. The stone falcon was not just a symbol. It was a tool, a secret, a passage through whatever guarded the fortress of the desert's oldest war. He closed his fingers around it. The weight felt right, important, grounding. "Thank you," he whispered. The watcher lowered their head in acknowledgement. But before Lawrence could speak again, a tremor rippled faintly beneath their feet. A distant rumble, muted, growing. Auda stood quickly. "The Turks?" "No," Lawrence said quietly. "This is deeper." From the shadows at the far end of the cavern, dust drifted gently from the ceiling. The tremor grew again, still mild, but unmistakable. Ferris paled. "Is the cavern collapsing?" Auda shook his head. "No. This is the desert shifting its shape. It warns us not to linger." The watchers stepped back and pointed to a second passage on the far side of the spring, an ascent leading upward and out of the ravine. Auda interpreted instantly. That path leads toward the fortress. It is time. Another tremor rolled beneath them, stronger this time. Stones rattled. The watchers stepped into the shadows, merging with them until they vanished completely, silent, gone, like spirits of the ravine. Lawrence looked at the stone falcon in his hand, the ancient map under his robe, the shimmering pool behind him. The moment had come. "Mount up," he said softly. "We head for the fortress." Auda nodded, "and whatever truth awaits within it." They stepped into the ascending tunnel as the cavern behind them shivered with another deep breath of the desert. The sanctuary had given them water, knowledge, and a key. Now it released them toward the final threshold of the desert's hidden war. The ascending tunnel led them out of darkness slowly, like waking from a long, cool dream. The air warmed as the passage curved upward, and the walls grew lighter in color, streaked with golden minerals that glimmered faintly with each step. Ahead, a pale glow marked the tunnel's exit, sunlight waiting patiently on the other side. The rumble beneath their feet eased. The desert had spoken its final warning. Now it seemed to watch, silent and expectant. Auda walked slightly ahead, guiding his camel with steady hands. "We are close," he murmured. "The land feels deliberate." Lawrence held the stone falcon tightly. Its carved wings were cold against his palm, but he felt warmth radiating within himself, a growing purpose fueled by the watcher's guidance, the map's revelation, and the hidden spring's blessing. Ferris looked both nervous and eager. "Do you think the fortress is real? Truly real?" Auda gave a small smile. In the desert, Faris, truth, and legend often sleep in the same bed. At last they stepped into the open. Lawrence blinked as sunlight flooded his vision, bright, brilliant, reflecting off pale stone. But when his eyes adjusted, the breath caught in his throat. There it was, the fortress of the star. It rose from the desert not like a man-made structure, but like something shaped by the earth itself and claimed by ancient hands. Its walls were tall and curved, carved from a pale stone that shimmered faintly like moonlit sand. Towers rose at its corners, not square but rounded, their peaks crowned with star-shaped battlements. A vast central dome anchored the fortress, smooth, seamless, reflecting sunlight with a gentle glow. At its peak, a carved falcon spread its wings toward the sky, as though guarding all beneath it. But more astonishing still was the sight below the walls. A basin of green, palm trees swayed in a breeze, cooled by hidden water channels. Low shrubs grew in orderly lines, fed by irrigation deeper than the eye could trace. The oasis surrounding the fortress was larger than any Lawrence had ever seen, a living heart beating in the emptiness of stone and sand. Ferris whispered, voice trembling, "It's impossible." Auda shook his head. "It is ancient. That makes it powerful." Lawrence took a few steps forward. The wind shifted, warm and steady, carrying the scent of water and distant palms. The fortress radiated a presence, an aura of solemn watchfulness. It felt neither abandoned nor inhabited, like something waiting for them. The falcon soared overhead, circling the highest tower before diving gently toward the central gate. It landed upon a carved stone perch at the entrance, as though returning to a home it had always known. Auda looked at Lawrence. "The Watchers guided us here, but we must enter alone." Lawrence nodded, hand tightening around the stone falcon. "That is what they intended all along." They approached the massive gate, two great slabs of stone carved with flowing lines and symbols matching those found in the cave, the chamber, and on the map. At the gate's center was a small, shallow indentation shaped exactly like the carved falcon Lawrence carried. A keyhole made for something not mechanical, but symbolic. Auda exhaled slowly. "Place it." Lawrence raised the carved falcon and fitted it gently into the indentation. The stone hummed. A soft vibration rippled outward across the gate, gentle, deep, like a chord struck on an enormous instrument. Lines of light awakened along the carvings, tracing the patterns with slow radiance. The dome glowed faintly, the wind stilled. Then the gate split silently down the center, not with a grind of ancient mechanisms, but with a smooth, flowing motion, like the opening of a curtain of stone. Beyond the gate lay a grand courtyard. Its floor was tiled with geometric patterns in pale and dark stone. A pool of water lay at the center, perfectly still, reflecting the sky and dome in uninterrupted symmetry. And around the courtyard, silence. No guards, no inhabitants, only the whisper of wind along carved pillars. Ferris whispered, "Is it empty?" Auda shook his head. "No place like this is ever truly empty." Lawrence stepped into the courtyard, and the moment he did, the air changed. A soft breeze curled around him. A faint sound drifted through the air, like distant chanting or the echo of footsteps long past. The water in the pool rippled, though no wind touched it. Auda placed a hand on his dagger, more in respect than caution. "The fortress remembers." Lawrence approached the pool. Beneath its surface, patterns of stone glowed faintly, symbolic pathways, matching those on the ancient map. "The heart of the desert's war," Lawrence whispered. "It's all here." Ferris looked around nervously. "What war exactly?" Before Lawrence could answer, a shadow moved at the far end of the courtyard. A figure, a person, standing perfectly still beneath the archway of the inner hall, tall, veiled, motionless. Not a watcher, this figure wore a darker veil, heavier robes embroidered with silver threads that shimmered in the reflected light. Auda's breath caught. "A guardian!" The figure raised an arm slowly, pointing toward the great interior doors of the hall. A summons, an invitation, a warning. Lawrence felt the moment settle around him, heavy, sacred. The journey across the sands, the hidden valley, the Watcher's guidance, the fleeing from the Turks, the ancient map, the stone Falcon key. Everything had led to this threshold. Auda turned to him. "Elorance, whatever truth lies inside, it is meant for you." Lawrence stepped toward the guardian. The fortress exhaled like a great stone heart preparing to speak after centuries of silence. The doors of the inner hall began to open, slowly, softly, inevitably. And Lawrence crossed into the final chamber where the desert's oldest secret waited to be revealed. Tonight, you have journeyed far across the desert, across dunes that sang, valleys that breathed, secret caverns carved by time, and at last to the gates of the ancient fortress of the star. Thank you for walking each step with Lawrence, with Auda, with Ferris, and with the silent watchers who guided them in veiled shadows. Your presence shaped the journey just as surely as the wind shaped the sands. As you prepare to rest, breathe softly and let the desert's quiet settle into you. The cool night air drifting over stone, the whisper of dunes settling in the dark, the faint cry of the falcon circling under the moon. Let every sound grow softer. Let every thought drift like sand through your fingers. Let your body grow heavy and calm, ready for sleep. And before you drift off, traveler, if you enjoyed this journey, please like, subscribe, and leave a gentle comment. I'd love to know where you wandered from tonight, whether you listened from the U.S., Europe, Canada, or anywhere else in the world, and what time your dream path carried you through this story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And may your night be peaceful, your dreams wide as the desert, and your sleep deep as the valley's quiet heart. Rest well.